with the help of drones. Those kind of disastrous kind of operations have been unleashed by Ukraine. So it is no point actually blaming either of the stakeholders or the warring factions. The issue here is that at the moment there is a very serious and sincere effort going on towards some kind of a lasting peace between two warring nations, and whether it will meet the light at the end of the tunnel or not is anybody's guess. The time will tell. But I think the time has come wherein some kind of a restraint has to be exercised, both by Russia as also Ukraine. And when you go in for the lasting peace, to make some beginning, looking at it from the military perspective, I would say all guns must freeze. The barrels must be actually mothballed. No firing on either side. That's the only way. And both the parties, warring parties, they must fall back to respective sides by a couple of kilometers. Or imaginary line should be regulated and monitored by a neutral party, and then the peace process should start. Going ahead with the peace process with this ding dong battle going on from either side is actually going to inflict lots of damage to innocent civilians, which is just you have explained in your question. This will go on endlessly without any sight for any kind of peace in times ahead. Back to you, Roshan.
Yes, it is a vicious cycle indeed. Please, sir, stay with us. We'll be right back with you. French President Emmanuel Macron will update France's nuclear doctrine, ruling out shared European control, but outlining what France can offer allies concerned about the U.S. nuclear umbrella under President Trump. While France and Britain are nuclear powers, most of Europe relies on the U.S. for deterrence. Recently, Germany raised discussions on a European nuclear deterrent. Macron has emphasized that France will maintain its exclusive control over its nuclear weapons and wants European partners to understand its doctrine. The update comes amid growing concerns over Russia's nuclear threat and a shifting global security landscape. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has visited Beijing, calling for a reset in trade relations with China. During his meetings with President Xi Jinping, Merz expressed his desire to deepen the comprehensive strategic partnership between Germany and China, Germany's largest trading partner last year. Merz, accompanied by a large business delegation, also addressed Germany's growing trade deficit with China, which has increased fourfold since 2020. Meanwhile, the German chancellor highlighted China's economic challenges, such as manufacturing overcapacity and market-distorting policies, while calling for fairer trade practices. China's leadership, in response, promised to support multilateralism and free trade, encouraging German companies to invest in China. The visit came amid strengthening European engagement with China, particularly after a rift with the U.S. under President Donald Trump. Furthermore, Merz had also discussed the Ukraine crisis and urged China to use its influence to promote peace. Regardless of these economic and political challenges, both sides have reaffirmed their commitment to dialogue and strategic cooperation with a focus on green transitions, automotive industry, and emerging technologies. Now joining us again is retired Major General Sudhakarji, senior geopolitical and strategic defense expert, joining us from Jaipur. Now, sir, from what we understand, China and Germany are essentially strengthening their ties. Do you foresee in the future that the U.S. will impose tariffs upon China, doing more business with Germany, and what will be the outcome of all of this?
Well, Roshan, brilliant question you have asked. A tariff issue, to my understanding, has been more than adequately addressed by the latest USA Supreme Court's verdict that any tariff over and above what is authorized to the President's executive power under the EIIP, that emergency powers of the President, will be illegal, and it is illegal. So to impose or to visualize that Donald Trump is going to impose tariff on China because Germany is getting closer and trying to deepen its trade relations with China, well, I have my doubts. He will think twice. Donald Trump will think twice before doing it. But what he can do is there are many other issues like the critical technology when you talk of. Take your mind back to 2023, the whole warfare of the trade and the technology transfer started by USA way back in 2023, and Netherlands was asked to stop providing the lithograph machine for the semiconductors. This is one such machine without which no semiconductor industry in the world can produce the wafer, silicon wafers. And on that, you, with the help of lithography, you actually code and plant those codes on the wafer for necessary outcome and the expected product, the result. So that with that beginning, the China at that point in time started twisting the tail, weaponized the rare earth element so much so that some of the rare earth elements and the critical technologies without which neither F-35 can fly, nor Tesla can move, nor the data centers will have any light to function. So it is called duninium, if I recall correctly. Similarly, you have germanium and gallium, without which no cell, the solar cells can be produced, nor your graphite blocks, which is dominated essentially more than 90% of the dominance is by China world over. So it's going to be again a kind of a brickbat kind of a thing going on from either of the sides. It's not going to take anywhere. So subsequently, what is going to happen? That the geoeconomics, which is dominating the world order today, will gradually gravitate towards China. That is going to be more dangerous than the tariff which Trump is trying to impose. So diplomacy and dialogue will go a long way in actually having a negotiated stance for a healthy and a prosperous kind of a world order in future. Back to you, Roshan.
Yeah, absolutely. I already do think that China has dominated the world market, especially in EV manufacturing. I know for a fact that Mercedes-Benz reported a drop in earnings as far as automotive development. Do you believe that this is also why that this partnership is happening right now in China, that maybe both parties can find a way to essentially strengthen ties, not only for diplomacy, but also for automotive manufacturing in Germany?
Yeah, but that's a brilliant point. I agree with your observation. However, let me qualify by saying that the present world order is going through a huge geopolitical churn because of multiple factors. We can't say it started with pandemic. I think it started with one single factor, that is the lack of trust in the world order today. That has been the central factor because of which neither the north nor the south nor east or west, none of the components or stakeholders in the world order today are trusting, and therefore the transatlantic relationship based on which the global apex organizations are actually, the architecture is based on, they have virtually become defunct. So much so the World Trade Organization, which was established at the behest of the United States of America way back in 1997, that also has been run aground. It has become defunct as of now. So under these circumstances, and over and above that, Donald Trump 2.0 has come out with a very noble idea of using tariff as the best way to actually, restore its status quo of supremacy in the global economy. With a debt of $38 trillion, debt to GDP ratio having gone as high as 168%, USA is in deep trouble. So this is actually making it very, very vitiated, very complex to navigate, and as a result, the trust is actually compelling, lack of trust, compelling the very NATO allies to look for partners away from the transatlantic relationship. And with the Greenland issue having come to the forefront, it has actually shattered all kinds of connections and the relationship between the European Union and UK with that of country like USA, and forcing them to look for partners like China, where they already have well accomplished and established network of manufacturing, of automobile industry and host of other industries, and it is only just about resetting the ties which will give them a momentum to carry forward the productivity of all their establishment in China. And they run a very huge deficit, trade deficit of 90 billion euros as of 2025. It may actually contribute towards the reduction of this trade deficit. That is in case of Germany. And also, Germany being the powerhouse, the economic powerhouse of Europe, would be actually setting a trend and become kind of a precedent for all other countries to make their orientation towards China, because that is the manufacturing base which willingly or unknowingly we outsourced to China for past 30, 40 years. And it is going to be nearly impossible to diversify and de-risk as we have contemplated. And going in for China plus one, it's a long order which time will tell us which direction we are heading to.
Thank you so much, sir. I do like your description of this partnership momentum. We'll chat again soon. Thank you. Next up, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced the strengthening of defense, trade, and counter-terrorism ties with Israel during a historic visit, which is the first in 9 years. Israel has been a long-time arms supplier to India, and the two countries now collaborate on joint manufacturing of defense equipment such as drones and missiles. While specifics of the defense deal remain private, the government officials have focused on broader bilateral ties and also securing a deeper defense agreement. Additionally, India and Israel are also working on a maritime and land corridor connecting India to the port of Haifa, which experts say is a move that will open new routes to Europe. This initiative, part of the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, is expected to improve relations between Israel and Arab nations, with Israel's Haifa port playing a crucial role. And now joining us is retired Major General Gigi Dwivedi, war veteran and professor of international relations and strategic studies, joining us from New Delhi. Now, sir, this move is fantastic for Modi and Israel. Of course, they're developing a new economic corridor. But my main concern and question is, will India isolate itself from the rest of the Middle East and the other Arab countries?
Well, Roshan, first and foremost, we need to understand that India and Israel relations are time tested, and this have been developed over more than half a century. And India has stopped hyphenating itself from the Arab world, or the weighing the relation between Israel and Palestine as two different, I would say, spectrums. So therefore, I think India is following a very nuanced and a policy which takes care of the interest. And it is not a zero-sum game that we are cooperating with Israel at the cost of Palestinian or other Arab state. That's not the case. So therefore, I think we need to take this in the larger perspective that India has a deep-rooted interest in Israel. India has deep-rooted interest in the Middle East region per se, and we have cordial relation with the Gulf countries, with Iran, with Egypt, and also with Israel, and we have never abandoned our support for Palestine. So therefore, when you look at this development of our relation with Israel, they are at the multiple spectrum. Of course, political relations are very important. We also have now the trade agreement is coming up, and you talked about the connectivity, because this connectivity, that is India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, well, this was during the last G20 meeting, this was mooted, and this is very important because you see the sea lines of communication, they can be disrupted through the Suez Canal at times. So this gives an alternate route to the Europe, and also gives us the strategic space to have better connectivity through Israel and through Middle East, as also through the Europe corridor. And the another important point is the defense relations, because India has a deep-rooted defense relation with Israel, and they have been time-tested. In fact, India is account for 34% of the Israelis' defense export, and now this relationship is being taken forward from purely transactional or purchase, relationship to the joint manufacturing, joint development, and there are a number of major agreements that are coming in during this meeting. And if you ask me a further question, I can elaborate on those defense agreements that are on the anvil. Roshan.
That's all we have time for right now, sir, but we'll chat with you again shortly. Thank you. Now, next up, a Thai political party that came second in this month's vote filed a criminal complaint against the nation's election commissioners, accusing them of violating election laws. The Reformist People's Party Deputy Party Leader Weo Asawa Rungruang has said that the Reformist People's Party submitted a case to a criminal court against seven election commissioners, the Election Commission's Secretary General, and another election official. Weo has added that two charges involve wrongful exercise of duties, and the last charge, we claimed, was about marking ballots with QR codes and barcodes which allow the votes to be traced and not kept secret as it should be. Meanwhile, the Election Commission has confirmed the victory of caretaker Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul's conservative Bumja Thai party, ratifying most of the vote results. Next up, Dr. Congo government forces have launched an attack on M23 rebels in the east, using drones to strike a key mining site. The conflict is centered around Rubaya, where M23 rebels have occupied the coltan-rich mine since April 2024, with help from Rwanda. The fighting intensified as local militias captured Kazinga and clashes spread to South Kivu. Despite Angola's ceasefire proposal and France's calls for peace, hostilities continue. M23 has set up a parallel administration in Rubaya, further complicating the conflict. Local residents are terrified, and the death toll from the drone strike remains unclear due to disrupted communication. And now joining us is retired Major General Gigi Dwivedi, war veteran and professor of international relations and strategic studies, joining us again from New Delhi. Sir, what do you make of this incident in Rwanda and how these parties will essentially work together in the future and essentially dissolve these disputes as well?
Well, Roshan, we need to understand the background of this whole issue. In Congo, there are rebel groups. What you said, AFC, is the alliance of the rebel groups who are rebelling against the government. And this M23 is the March 23 movement. Basically, this is the contest for the mineral-rich, region of Kivu, and especially the Zubaya mines. Now, these rebel groups restructured again in 2021. And therefore, these clashes have been taking place between the government forces, that is the DRM's Democratic Republic of Congo, and between the AFC, that is the Rebel Alliance, and the M23, the March 23 movement. Now, these clashes have been going on for quite some time, and there is another force behind this, that is Rwanda. Rwanda army, almost 3,000 to 4,000 troops, are supporting these rebels. And as I said, the major contest is for the rich mines of Rubaya, which produced a very important mineral, which is key to the electronics and the laptop manufacturing. Now, lately, the Congo forces have taken this counteroffensive, and they are used the drones and also the other weapon systems to suppress this AFC and M23 rebels together. Now, this is exactly what the fighting going on. Of course, there have been effort to bring in peace, even by the US and also the other neighboring countries, but that are not rectified. And this clashes have flared up lately because the rebels are duly supported by the Rwandan forces, and that's why they are able to sustain a fight against the government forces of Congo. Roshan.
Yes, of course, you mentioned this coltan-rich mine and, of course, this mineral that helps laptop manufacturing. Is this mineral being exported out of Rubaya? And if so, how do the exporters and the trade administrations essentially lock down on what's happening in Rubaya and stop all this conflict?
Yes, absolutely, because the wire mines produce about 30% of the Calton material, and that is the major export earning of Congo. And this is why the contest is between the rebels and the Congo forces, because they want to control this mineral-rich area. And the government agencies, of course, are involved because they directly ensure or they directly oversee the exports, but also there is another market that is being controlled by the rebel forces, and that's where they generate the money to sustain these rebellion and the insurgents activities. And of course, Rwanda also gets a share of it. So there are two sides. One is the government side, which is involved in the official trade, and on the other side are the rebel groups, which also do the shadow trading in these very important minerals from Rubaya and Kiyu mineral belt. Roshan.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll chat again soon. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran and the US hold the latest round of talks in Geneva today aimed at resolving their long-standing nuclear dispute and averting new US strikes on Iran following a large-scale military build-up. The two countries renewed negotiations this month, hoping to tackle a decades-long standoff over Tehran's nuclear program. Cuban forces.
The physics was known for quite a while, and so that I think it hasn't really changed our understanding the quantum world work.
Job with the James Webb Space Telescope was to look as far back in time as we could to see the universe as it was young.
Changing the basic attitude about what education is for and what it needs to be.
Biology, medical studies, they make great progress.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi, during Operation Sindoor, made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
The physics was known for quite a while, and so that I think it hasn't really changed our understanding the quantum world work.
The job with the James Webb Space Telescope was to look as far back in time as we could to see the universe as it was young.
Changing the basic attitude about what education is for and what it needs to be.
Biology, medical studies, they make great progress.
What we
Welcome to Nobel Laureates. I'm Ellie Richardson. This is the show where we sit down with the world's most brilliant minds, recipients of the highest honour in science, to discuss the ideas and breakthroughs shaping our future. Today, we're honoured to welcome a pioneer in the field of microscopy, Nobel laureate Professor Eric Betzig. Professor Betzig was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2014 for his development of super-resolved fluorescent microscopy, a technique that revealed the unseen world inside living cells. Professor Betzig, welcome to NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. My first question for you is, before your work, scientists believed there was a hard limit to how clearly we could see inside cells using light microscopes. In simple terms, what changed and why was breaking that limit such a moment for science?
Well, for 400 years, microscopy has been the main tool by which we look at living things below the level of the naked eye. And it was learned around 150 years ago that there is a limit based on the wavelength of light to how small you could see. That limit is about 100 times bigger than the molecules which make up cells. And so what my technique, Palm, and others like it did is find loopholes in that physical law to allow us to get closer to the molecular level. In Palm in particular, the way it works is it takes the molecules that you want to see in the sample and one puts a tag on them, a glowing tag. And the tag can be turned on and off with light at will. And normally the problem isn't so much being able to see or detect a single molecule. It's that in the normal microscope, they look like big fuzzy blobs. And if you have lots of molecules, which is what you have in a cell, they all overlap and they make a smush. And so what Palm does is it turns on the molecules just a few at a time so that they're likely separated by more than the size of their fuzzy balls in the normal microscope. And you can point to the center of a fuzzy blob with much better precision than the diameter of the fuzzy blob. So in other words, you can figure out the location of those few molecules. You turn those off, turn another subset of molecules on, and repeat thousands of times until sort of point by point, like doing a painting by pointillism, you build up an image of the sample at near molecular resolution instead of the old limits.
You developed a method called photo-activated localization microscopy, or PALM. For viewers who aren't scientists, how could you describe what this technique does and why it allows us to see details inside living cells that were once invisible?
So I essentially just answered that. The technique I described is PALM. So again, it's by localizing or finding the location of individual molecules in a cell. It's important because essentially you can think of a cell as a city. And every cell in your body has about 20 million protein molecules in the same way that, I don't know, Mumbai or something might have 20 million people. And it's the interactions between all of those molecules that take us from non-living to living. And the ability to actually watch those interactions at the individual level gives us a lot of insight into how cells work, in the same way that being able to watch the traffic patterns or how people go to work in a city can tell you a lot about how a city lives, functions, creates things of value.
Your technology lets researchers watch proteins move and interact inside living cells. Why is seeing these processes in real time so important for understanding diseases like cancer or Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so again, you know, everything fundamentally comes down to we are large collections of molecules, okay? And everything that we are, and everything all the way up to the entire biosphere, is about levels of emergence where dissimilar things interact against one another. And even at the fundamental level, it's really random inside of a cell how they bounce around. But because of sort of the law of large numbers, half the time you get heads, half the time you get tails, even though it's random on the individual level, when they work collectively together, they end up becoming deterministic, and therefore you end up getting things like cells being able to divide or stuff like that. And it's all about what's happening at the single cell level, at the single molecule level. Now, that being said, many diseases come to changes in individual protein molecules. For example, there's a childhood cancer that's due to a little tiny section of amino acids, which is through a mutation grafted onto a protein, which is responsible for creating RNA, which is responsible for creating DNA, which is responsible for creating different things in the cell. And that little graft makes it so that it overproduces certain proteins. And so one of the things that one of my collaborators did is found a way to snip off that mutation and be able to recover what was going on. Now, the way we could see its effect at the single molecule level was by PALM, and to see that that little handle on the protein was causing the molecule to be overly sticky in its interactions, so it would end up leading to too much proteins. And so by clipping it off, it recovered the natural level of proteins, and then the cancer phenotype. This isn't in people, this is in cells in a dish. The normal phenotypes were recovered. That's so important that it led us actually to found a company called Icon Therapeutics, where we use single molecule tracking as a screen to find drug candidates to cure different diseases.
You later developed lattice light sheet microscopy, which allows scientists to capture incredibly detailed 3D images without damaging living cells. How does this method protect cells while still giving us such sharp images?
Yeah, this one's a little harder to describe, but as you can imagine, every organism works in 3 dimensions. We aren't in a flatland. Yet the microscopes we use to observe them are only in focus in one plane at a time. So if you start to look at a large organism, when you're looking deep inside a transparent organism, you're seeing a lot of out of focus light from the regions above and below in the sample. That's the way normal microscopes work for years and years, and people have just had to live with this out of focus light. The other problem with the out of focus light is, besides being fuzzy and not very valuable, you're still throwing light through the entirety of the specimen, and so you're killing it, damaging it because of the light over time. So what light sheet microscopy does is, instead of having the light come from a lens that's from above looking down on the sample, it takes a second lens from the side to create a sheet of light which only illuminates the one plane that's in focus from the lens looking from the top. And then what it does is it scans that plane by plane up through the organism and develops a 3-dimensional picture. So that alone reduces the amount of damage and bleaching to the cell that is happening, because you're not illuminating the whole cell at once, only the one plane that really has high information. But in addition, it turns out that the old microscopes would work by focusing the light to a point, and that point is then driven around point by point to get an image. There's 2 disadvantages to that. One is it's slow to go point by point, and the other is that it means you have to have very intense light at that point. And it turns out that not only is light bad, but light gets far worse if it's more intense. It doesn't go linearly. So if I double the dose, my damage to the sample might increase by a factor of 8. And so you want to keep the peak power low, and you want to spread it out over the entirety of the plane. And lattice light sheet microscopy in particular uses some tricks of physics to create an especially thin sheet of light, which makes light sheet even better. In fact, it makes it that light sheet is so thin that you actually improve the resolution in that vertical direction compared to normal microscopes. And because you illuminate a whole plane at once, instead of a point like in the old microscopes, it's very fast. You use a camera, you snap one plane, you move up, 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 and you can do that potentially tens or 100 times a second. So now all of a sudden you don't have a single 3D snapshot of your organism. You have a 4-dimensional movie of this 3-dimensional dynamics happening everywhere inside of that organism. And you can do it for long periods of time because you've reduced the amount of damage you're doing to the cell tremendously.
One of the challenges in microscopy is that intense light can harm cells. How did your innovations help solve that problem, and what new discoveries became possible because of it?
Yeah, so again, it relates to what I just answered. Is the keys are, first off, to make sure that in a 3-dimensional organism, because a microscope only has one plane that's in focus at a time, the light sheets can find the light to that plane so that there's no damage elsewhere. The other thing that was less well appreciated was that the damage that you get in a cell is not strictly proportional to the intensity of the light. It goes as some high multiple of the intensity of the light, so that the more you can keep the light intensity down and still get the light out that you need to get your information, the better off you are. And so that was a bit of a surprise, but it was very, very effective. And in terms of what light sheet in general has done, is in some ways I believe that light sheet microscopes in general, and lattice light sheet microscopy in particular, are probably far more important for biology today than the Palm technique that won me the Nobel. It's certainly true that lattice light sheet is the invention I'm proudest to have done, and it has personally, for me, revealed the beauty of living systems in a detail that nobody's ever seen before. I mean, I felt for the first few years after developing that microscope like I was Galileo. I was the only guy to have a good telescope, and everywhere, every specimen I pointed it at, we were seeing new things. In particular, for example, how immune cells attach themselves to cancer cells, and how they destroy other cells, and seeing that in detail, and seeing this thing that looks like a lamprey eel come up and attach to another cell and then blow up that cell. And all of these processes that the problem is that biologists historically have used tools that are not imaging based. They've used things like biochemistry, molecular biology, like understanding DNA and so forth, and structural biology, like freezing a cell, slicing it in little bits, and throwing it into an electron microscope. So they're what I call reductionists. It's like trying to understand a car by taking it down to its parts and looking at the parts. But you'll never be able to understand how a car engine works from a random pile of engine parts. And so what microscopy in general and live cell lattice light sheet does in particular allows us to look at these parts as the engine is running, and to go in and look at the cylinders and look at the piston rings and do whatever, all in a living system. So much of biology that you read in textbooks is really just hypotheses. You think on the basis of some biochemical experiment that this protein goes here and does this and attaches here. And you can go on YouTube and find many simulations of how things work inside of the cell. They're all caricatures. They're as close to reality as Mickey Mouse is to a real mouse. And it's because that they have only worked from incomplete information, and so their imagination has to fill in the gaps. Lattice light sheet and tools like this allow us to observe directly what's going on, and don't rely us to use our imperfect imagination to understand how cells work.
Scientists now combine different types of microscopes in what's known as correlative microscopy. Why is it valuable to look at the same cell in more than one way, and what extra insight does that provide?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's true that every microscope has its own what's called contrast, how it gets information out of the cell. And it's the same thing, like if you could only see in black and white, you'd be limited in some ways in where you could learn. If you could only listen to sound in a small section of frequencies, you'd be limited in what you can learn. It's the same thing with microscopes, is that there are many, many, many ways to look at what's happening in a cell. There are proteins, there's different chemical factors that are used for signaling. There's the cytosol. There's many, many things that are happening inside of the cell. And every time we use any microscope, we're only looking at a small fraction of everything that is there. And different microscopes have different advantages. So as good as lattice light sheet microscopy is, it's still limited by that limit of 100 times bigger than a molecule. If we want to do better than that, we combine lattice light sheet with the Palm technique, and then we can look at single molecules and three-dimensional organisms. If we want to do, but even there, we can only study molecules on which we've put a tag that can glow. That causes problems. So electron microscopes kill the cell, freeze the cell, slice the cell, but they can look at slices of the cell at much higher resolution of all features, not just the ones that have the labels on them, and get this sort of global contrast of where everything is. And then you can do, for example, Palm correlatively with electron microscopy that tells you where the specific proteins you're most interested in for some disease, where they are located in relation. So it's kind of like electron microscopy gives you the whole Google map of all of the streets and stuff. And the palm will tell you exactly where the restaurants are that you want to go to. So those types of correlative things provide a lot more information than any individual technique alone.
Modern microscopes generate enormous amounts of data over time, almost like filming a movie at the molecular level. How important are computers and artificial intelligence in helping scientists understand what they're seeing?
Yes, none of our microscopes would exist without computers. First, to automatically control all the widgetry inside of the microscope. It's like they're sort of the conductor of a symphony, when all sorts of parts inside of the microscope have to work together and play their notes at the right time. But much bigger than that is the fact that when you start imaging, you get lots of data. You know, in the old days, again, with biochemistry and stuff like that, you may get megabytes of information out. We get megabytes or millions of megabytes in a few hours from one of our microscopes. So it's a whole nother level. For audience people who know numbers, basically we take 4 million bytes of information every hour from one of our modern microscopes. And what that means is that pretty soon we end up having billions of megabytes of information stored on hard drives of data we've taken. Fortunately, the computer revolution has kept up with our ability to take that data. We also have developed tools to be able to take that data. It doesn't do any good to be just bits on a hard drive inside of a computer. You need to look at it. And so we've worked very hard with, again, modern GPU clusters and so forth. So as those millions and millions of megabytes are coming out in real time, they're processed. The images are processed. The fields of view are stitched together. Everything is put together in a nice, pretty package. But it's still on bits on a hard drive. The next step is then we want to visualize it. And so we end up using computer software to render three-dimensional views of this and then stitch together multiple frames of that to create three-dimensional movies. So that can be informative, but that is really where the Achilles heel of our technology is today, because humans were evolved to look in 2 dimensions plus time. And the data that we have on these hard drives is in 5 dimensions: X, Y, Z, time, and then all the different colors that represent different features inside of the organism. If you just put that on a computer screen, as you've seen, you know, people can rotate around things in 3 dimensions, they can watch 3-dimensional movies, but at any instant in time when you're doing that, you're not really seeing the real 3D, you're seeing a projection, a 2-dimensional projection of a 3-dimensional object. All the things behind other things are hidden from you. And so you don't get the complete picture. And so we don't have complete information. And so there's 2 problems with this. The first is that as a result, because the data is so fast, there is just no way that humans can navigate, even if they could think in 5D, there's no way that humans could navigate that. It's a vast universe that is far beyond what your brain can easily comprehend. And then the other problem is that 5 dimensions is just not accessible to us as humans. And so what that has led to is, for years after developing the lattice light sheet, I would have dozens of groups come to my lab, get some data. They would all go back with big smiles on their faces, and they've seen things about the organisms they've studied for generations that they've never known before. The trouble is then they come back to us crying a month later because they have terabytes of data and they have no way of scalably taking all of that data and understanding it. So this is a long way of saying that the frontier forward is to be able to create minds that can think and see in 5 dimensions to be able to extract the answers to any questions from this vast millions of megabytes of data. We ask through a large language model to the computer. The computer has developed a 5-dimensional vision model through artificial intelligence to be able to understand what is a molecule, what is a cell, what is this cell type, what is this process that's happening over here. Oh, that's cell division. Da, da, da. So we have to train AI to understand biology. Once it understands what we know about biology, then we can query it through a large language model and ask questions, and it will be our Sherpa to guide us through this universe inside of the organism to do this. This is nearly science fiction at this point. And I'm the last person in the world who ever wanted to get involved in AI, because historically, I try to move far, far away from what everybody else is doing, and everybody's doing AI. But I've concluded that this is the only possible path forward for us to be able to get understanding of the data that modern microscopes can produce.
Looking ahead, how close are we to being able to watch life unfold at the molecular level inside whole organisms, and what could that mean for the future of medicine?
So we do it already. So being able to look inside an organism and watch single molecule kinetics is something we do frequently. But again, when you're looking down at the molecular level in an organism, usually you don't have totality. You're not trying to look across the whole organism at once. You look at a subset of cells and you try to understand what's going on. What it means, though, is understanding single molecule kinetics, in my opinion, is the frontier of drug discovery. And like I said, we founded a company in 2018 to do exactly this. Not in whole organisms to begin with, but in single cells. And what you find is that, so basically what happens is we have a company, it's got 30 microscopes that basically produce a billion megabytes of data every day, and of the tracks of single molecules as they're moving in cells in hundreds of multi-well plates as different potential drug candidates are put in different wells, and see how they affect the kinetics. So we look at the phenotypes that happen under non-disease conditions. Then we look at the kinetics of what's happening under disease conditions. And the goal is to add different drug compounds and see if there are certain ones which end up recovering the native kinetics or motions of the molecules, even in the diseased cells. And so that has been transformative for our understanding in this company of how molecules interact with one another to do different essential processes inside of the cell. I would say that company has a far greater knowledge of protein-protein interactions than any entity on Earth. Now, whether that will translate in the end to accelerating drug discovery remains to be seen, but I'm pretty optimistic that and then eventually coupled with not just at the molecular level, but how these things then correlate to what happens at higher levels within the cell, from the organelles to single cells to collective motion of cells to the whole organism. If we can sort of gradually build up that, our knowledge of biology and our ability to discover drugs will literally grow exponentially.
Thank you, Professor Betzig, for sharing your insights and reflections on the extraordinary potential of modern microscopy and its impact on science and medicine. Thank you. This has been Nobel Laureates, where we bring you face-to-face with people pushing the limits of human knowledge. For more stories from the world's greatest minds, stay tuned to NewsX World.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
The physics was known for quite a while, and so that I think it hasn't really changed our understanding the quantum world work.
Job with the James Webb Space Telescope was to look as far back in time as we could to see the universe as it was young.
Changing the basic attitude about what education is for and what it needs to be.
Biology, medical studies, they make great progress.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
The physics was known for quite a while, and so that I think it hasn't really changed our understanding the quantum world work.
job with the James Webb Space Telescope was to look as far back in time as we could to see the universe as it was young.
Hello and welcome. I'm Rashan Gidwani and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the headlines for this hour. Despite sweeping job creation pledges ahead of Nepal's March 5th national elections, thousands of young workers continue to depart daily for the Gulf and Southeast Asia. Following the violent Gen Z uprising in September 2025, new political alliances like the Rashtriya Swatantra Party are promising a strategic reset, but a stagnant domestic economy and 136-party fragmentation have left 18.9 million voters skeptical that any new government can replace the 1.2 billion monthly remittance lifeline. Russia officially questioned today how U.S. President Donald Trump's newly established Board of Peace will coexist with the UN Security Council. Kremlin officials argue the board, which Trump claims will bypass ineffective diplomatic channels to resolve global conflicts, lacks international legitimacy and threatens the established post-World War II global security order. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova labeled the fatal shootout off the Cuban coast an aggressive provocation by Washington intended to trigger a regional conflict. The Kremlin's intervention follows Cuba's claim that it acted in self-defense against armed infiltrators from Florida, further straining U.S.-Russia relations as Moscow reinforces its support for Havana. Ahead of PM Mark Carney's upcoming visit to Delhi, Canadian authorities have suddenly begun softening their allegations of transnational repression against India. Sources in Ottawa suggest a strategic reset is underway to repair trade relations critical to the Canadian economy. A federal judge rules the Trump administration's third country deportation policy unlawful, citing violations of due process. The ruling temporarily halts the rapid removal of migrants to nations other than their own, pending a government appeal. Malaysian Foreign Minister Mohammed Hassan issues an urgent plea for diplomacy as nuclear talks resume in Geneva today. Kuala Lumpur warns that the increased U.S. naval presence in the Persian Gulf risks a global energy crisis and a total closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Hong Kong's Court of Appeal overturns the 2022 fraud conviction and sentence of pro-democracy tycoon Jimmy Lai, ruling that the lower court erred in its judgment. While the 78-year-old remains in prison serving a separate 20-year national security sentence, the surprise ruling marks a significant legal victory for the defense. A U.S. Air Force C-146 Wolfhound sustained significant damage after hitting a concrete barrier during a roadway landing exercise in Pangasinan. 5 personnel are injured in the accident, which marks the first attempted highway landing operation in the Philippines. And here are the top stories for the hour. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian reiterated that Tehran is not seeking nuclear weapons, stressing that this policy is in line with the directives of the country's supreme leader. Pezeshkian made these comments ahead of upcoming talks with the United States in Geneva, where both countries will discuss Iran's nuclear program and possible sanctions relief. The president emphasized that even if he wanted to pursue a nuclear arms path, he would be precluded from doing so due to doctrinal restrictions. The meeting in Geneva follows a previous round of talks between Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Omani counterpart Saeed Badr al-Busaidi, who will mediate the talks. The aim of the upcoming dialogue is to resolve a decades-long standoff over Iran's nuclear ambitions, which the US and other Western countries fear fear could lead to the development of nuclear arms. Iran denies these claims, insisting that its nuclear program is peaceful. Regardless, the talks come at a critical time as tensions continue to mount between the two countries over Iran's nuclear activities and sanctions. And now joining us is retired Major General A.K. Sawach, geostrategic expert, joining us from New Delhi. Now, sir, with all these essentially complications, what do you make of the future of these countries involved?
Roshan, the situation is very complex, quite fluid. What will happen in next 4 to 5 days, no one can predict. But certainly there are some red lines which have been drawn by US. US has three demands as far as Iran is concerned. One is that it should not have a nuclear weapon, should not enrich its uranium more than 5%, which is required only for peaceful purpose. And the second thing is that it should reduce the number of ballistic missile and also cut down its range. And third thing is to helping the proxy like Hezbollah, Houthis, and Hamas. Now, as far as Iran is concerned, Iran is agreeing on a demand of nuclear weapon. Iran, like President Pezeshkian has already stated that as far as Iran is concerned, it is open for inspection by IEA and its program is totally civil. That may not be true, but the fact is, as on today, they are ready to negotiate on that issue. But they possibly are not ready to negotiate on the missile as well as helping the proxy. Now, the point is, no one wants war. Iran knows it that if the war takes place, they will be affected badly. Their economic is not doing well. There is inflation, unemployment. There is a protest which were going inside Iran, which still are active. So Iran will like to avoid this. Iran knows it that US has already massed almost 60 to 70,000 troops in Middle East. It has got two aircraft carrier group now, USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford. It has Tomahawk missile in submarine. It has got B-2 bombers, which is Diego Garcia. So overall, US is completely prepared, and US has almost surrounded Iran. So therefore, the point is Iran will not like to go for a war. Iran will try to avoid it by showing to US it is ready to compromise on the issue of the nuclear weapons, and that's way the talks will now be taking place between between Iran and US, which will be brokered by Oman. So possibility of some sort of solution seemingly looks to be high. If it does not happen, then in case the war take place, it will be catastrophic for the whole world. Let's see how it will affect US. See, US also knows that Iran is not Venezuela. In case if Iran is being attacked by US, Iran will also respond and respond with might. Iran has about 2,500 to 3,000 missile, including a hypersonic ballistic missile. It will basically hit all the bases of USA in Middle East, whether it's Saudi, UAE, Oman, Jordan, Bahrain. At the same time, it will hit Israel. And there is a possibility of Iran closing a Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world oil goes. It will hit the economy of the world, and the oil rate will possibly go more than $100 per barrel. Considering all this, US also knows it. It may be easy to start the war, but it will very, very difficult to stop. And therefore, some sort of solution, some sort of compromise, some sort of agreement, if in case they reach in this talk, will be ideal, because they know the war will not be good for either party. US will not have a clear-cut victory. In case some of the ship of US is being drowned or hit by Iran, that will be a moral victory. I suppose both sides are taking things very cautiously. Let's hope how things build up. But to me, it looks like that whatever US is doing, it is more of a posturing, putting a tremendous pressure on Iran to give away its nuclear weapon program. I suppose that's the main aim. And as far as Iran is concerned, I suppose it is now ready to compromise on certain issues because it knows if it does not compromise, then America is going to punish them and punish them very hard.
Thank you, sir. Stay with us. We'll be right back with you. Next up, senior advisors to U.S. President Donald Trump have reportedly expressed a preference for Israel to strike Iran first, believing it would provide better political optics and strengthen support for a U.S. military response. The administration's considerations include the risks of U.S. casualties and the possibility of depleting military resources, which could leave room for China to act on Taiwan. This discussion comes as the third round of U.S.-Iran nuclear talks is set to begin in Geneva today. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is expected to meet with Trump's envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, to discuss the potential for a deal or the increased risk of military escalation. However, Iran has made it clear that it will never abandon its nuclear activities and has warned that U.S. bases in the region could become legitimate targets if attacked. And now joining us again is retired Major General A.K. Sawach, geostrategic expert, joining us from New Delhi. Now, sir, President Modi also just met with Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu. If the U.S. essentially supports the fact that Israel should use their forces to attack Iran, will India be involved in this as well as far as their military goes? Please, sir.
Absolutely not. As far as India is concerned, India is very crystal clear that India has got its friend as far as Arab countries are concerned, whether it's Saudi, UAE, Oman. It has got very good relation with Iran. It has got good relation with Israel. So India is not going to become part of any conflict in Middle East. They don't deny the fact. As we were saying earlier, the point is this time Russia and China is coming in absolutely clear that they are trying to help out Iran. They have already given them the air defense system HQ-9, HQ-15, HQ-19, S-300. It is giving them a real-time intelligence. So weapons, ammunition, real-time intelligence will make a difference. I suppose the Iran also knows it, that this time Russia and China are supporting it all out. Now, the point which is saying is there can be a strategy. As far as the US is concerned, there is a school of thought that there should be a lightning strike done by the US. It should be a precision shooting basically on the nuclear installation of Iran, as well as targeting the political and military leadership. But US also knows that once they hit the nuclear facilities of Iran or their political military commander, there will be a strong response from Iran, and that response will be quite deadly, and the war can then continue for longer time. So they are now coming with the idea, rather than US attacking Iran, it is better Israel attack Iran, and Iran will then respond to Israel, and then US can come in by saying that they have come in to support Israel. That possibly is a strategy which they may be doing, because the US administration, Trump knows it, that there is public opinion is totally against in US for this strike. They don't want any war. They don't want body bags to come back in US. So I suppose this may be a strategy by US to basically encourage Israel to attack Iran on its nuclear facilities, and when Iran respond back to Israel or Iran also hit some of the bases, then it gives the excuse for the US to strike back on Iran. There may be a possibility of this kind taking place in case the talk failed, which are going to take place today in Geneva.
Stay with us, sir. We'll be right back with you. Now, moving on, Russia has condemned the latest incident off the coast of Cuba, which involved a Florida-registered speedboat, describing it as an aggressive provocation by the United States. The incident, which took place on Wednesday on the 25th of February, saw a group of exiles sail into Cuban waters and open fire on a Cuban patrol. Cuban forces responded, killing reportedly 4 of the exiles and wounding 6 others. The Cuban Border Patrol patrol commander was also injured in the exchange. Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova has accused the United States of intentionally escalating the situation, with the goal of triggering a conflict. Moreover, the Cuban government has called the incident a direct attack on their territorial sovereignty, while Russia supports Cuba's position, viewing the U.S. actions as a part of a larger pattern of aggression in the region. And now joining us is retired Major General A.K. Sawach, geostrategic expert, joining us again from New Delhi. Now, sir, what do you make of this accusation from Russia?
You know, the situation is quite complex and fluid even in Western Hemisphere. You know, the US feels that the Western Hemisphere should be totally under its control. It has already taken a control of Venezuela. And as far as Cuba is concerned, no one can forget 1962 when that nuclear episode has taken place between US and Russia on a Cuba missile. Now, the point is, as far as Cuba is concerned, it is very close to Russia, and Cuba is been always with the left taken by the military rulers. Now, as far as Venezuela is concerned, discounted oil was coming to Cuba, and Cuba economy was dependent quite a bit on the oil which was received from Venezuela. After Nicolas Maduro being kidnapped and taken by the US, and Delcy Rodriguez has come. And now this Cuba is not getting any oil from Venezuela. It is already hitting the economy of Cuba. And now US is putting tremendous pressure. It wants a regime change in Cuba. It wants a regime which is pro-US. And that's the strategy which the US is now following. It is putting tremendous pressure on the Cuba. It is now trying to target their ships, target their boats which are going in the sea. Basic aim is to make sure that somehow it will able to change the regime in Cuba. Does they do some sort of action what they did in Venezuela? The time will tell. The chances seemingly looks to be less because Cuba is totally in support given by the Russia. Russia will react to it. But yes, as on today, the situation is quite volatile, and US will try to put pressure on Cuba and try that its regime is changed as soon as feasible, and a regime which is pro-US comes there, so that, you know, Western Hemisphere, the total control is of US in time to come.
Stay with us, sir. We'll be right back with you. Moving on, Cuba has announced that its Coast Guard foiled an attempted infiltration from the United States, firing on a Florida-registered speedboat near its shores. In a firefight, 4 people were killed and 6 were injured. According to Cuba's Interior Ministry, the attackers, all Cuban nationals living in the U.S., intended to carry out a terrorist attack. The authorities found assault rifles, handguns, Molotov cocktails, and military gear on the boat. Listen in.
El Ministerio del Interior informó este miércoles sobre la agresión armada contra una unidad de superficie de las tropas guardafronteras en la zona noreste del Canalizo El Pino, en Cayo Falcones, municipio Corralillo, provincia Villa Clara. Se ocuparon fusiles de asalto, armas cortas, artefactos explosivos de construcción artesanal, cócteles Molotov, chalecos antibalas, mirillas telescópicas y uniformes de camuflaje. Además, se procedió a la detención en el territorio nacional del ciudadano Duniel Hernández Santos, enviado desde los Estados Unidos para garantizar la recepción de la infiltración armada, quien en estos momentos se encuentra confeso de sus acciones.
Puntualiza que se ha podido establecer que la lancha rápida neutralizada con matrícula de Florida FL 7726SH transportaba 10 personas armadas que, según declaraciones preliminares de los detenidos, tenían intenciones de realizar una infiltración con fines terroristas.
Se ocuparon.
Next up, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is in Israel on his 2-day trip, hold talks with the Israeli President Herzog. Listen in.
Eastern Hemisphere. So, you know, we know you lead the world in so many fields, and we are very moved and excited that you're here with us. Toda rabba.
Thank you, Excellency. राष्ट्रपति जी, आपने जिस उम्दा शब्दों से हम सबका स्वागत किया है, इसके लिए मैं आपका बहुत बहुत आभारी हूं। और मैं देख रहा हूं कि कल से जिस प्रकार से मेरा और मेरे डेलीगेशन का इजराइल में स्वागत सम्मान हुआ है, वो भारत के प्रति, भारतीयों के प्रति इजराइल के दिलों में जो गहरा लगाव है उसका प्रतिबिंब है, और इसके लिए मैं बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। एक्सेलेंसी, आपने सही कहा कि भारत और इजराइल का संबंध अनेक क्षेत्रों में बड़ी मजबूती के साथ ग्लोबल गुड के लिए काम आ सकता है। साइंस हो, इनोवेशन हो, एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूशंस हो, और कुछ चीजों में तो आपने बहुत बड़ी महारत है, खास करके पानी के संबंध में, एग्रीकल्चर के संबंध में। और भारत इजराइल की बहुत सी अच्छी चीजों को आज भी भारत में, खास करके एग्रीकल्चर में, लागू करने का प्रयास करता है, और उसके अच्छे परिणाम भी निकल रहे हैं। राष्ट्रपति जी, मेरी खुशी है कि मुझे इसके पहले भी आपको अलग अलग जगह पे मिलने का मौका मिला है। मैंने आपको विचारों की स्पष्टता सुनी है, भारत के प्रति आपका मान सम्मान का भाव देखा है, और इसके लिए मैं भी आपका बहुत आभारी हूं। और राष्ट्रपति जी, आज मुझे मौका है, जब मैं आपके पास आया हूं, भारत के लोग आपका स्वागत करने के लिए बहुत उत्सुक हैं, और इसलिए मैं विशेष रूप से आपको भारत आने का निमंत्रण देता हूं। और मैं आपसे आग्रह करूंगा कि सिर्फ दिल्ली आकर के मत जाना, कुछ समय ज्यादा निकालना, ताकि भारत के अन्य कुछ स्थानों को भी, वहां के लोगों को भी आपका स्वागत करने का अवसर मिले।
A 14-year-old Palestinian boy, Jad Jadallah, was shot by Israeli soldiers last November in the West Bank. He lays untreated for over 30 minutes as soldiers blocked ambulances from reaching him. Despite claims by the IDF of providing initial medical treatment, witnesses and paramedics deny this. Jad's family accuses the soldiers of planting a rock next to him to frame him. His body has yet to be returned, and the cause of his death remains unclear. Next up, China's Commerce Ministry has confirmed its commitment to maintaining stable and sustainable trade relations with the United States. The ministry has stated its intention to implement the consensus reached with the U.S. on the 4th of February, earlier this month, that followed a phone call between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. At the same time, suppliers to U.S. aerospace and semiconductor firms are struggling with a worsening shortage of rare earth materials such as yttrium and scandium. These are elements essential for high-temperature engine coatings, defense technology, and advanced chip components, and almost entirely produced in China. Data shows that exports of yttrium to the United States have fallen sharply since controls were introduced. This highlights China's near monopoly over global supply of these critical minerals, and also the vulnerability of U.S. supply chains to fluctuations in Chinese export policy. And now joining us is Collins Chong Yu Kiet, Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joining us from Kuala Lumpur. Hi, sir. How are you? Thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Roshan.
Now, let's dive right in. China and the U.S., they're essentially getting off on a call on the 4th of February, but their relations have been strained in the past, and especially in the last few years with more tariffs being introduced. Is this sort of diplomacy between the two countries temporary, or do you see relations between both nations straining in the future as well?
Well, this is, also a reflection of the growing, economic, and structural weaknesses on the part of China, where, the language being used now, signals tactical de-escalation. It's not a strategic convergence. We've seen how the repeated emphasis on creating a stable, healthy, sustainable trade deal. So all this reflects a much calibrated, diplomatic tone by China that is aimed at reducing trade tensions. Of course, also as part of the leading up of the efforts towards this visit by President Trump later on. But of course, we've seen how China's economy remains a key driver behind this new conciliation in terms of the messaging, slowing export growth, the continuous exodus of these tech firms out of China, and we have weak domestic demand as usual, and property stress and all that. And of course, there's this compelling need for continuous access to U.S. tech, U.S. market. But on the other hand, we have seen how the resilient U.S. economy in terms of the ongoing export controls on advanced technology, financial restrictions, as well as these supply chain reshoring policies and decoupling efforts. So all these have put the U.S. on a firmer ground, on firmer this negotiating ground. Of course, also having greater leverage, and this is part of the continuous efforts for China to be seen as a responsible economic actor in the region, especially in the Indo-Pacific, and being attempting to portray itself as as a stable and sustainable economic power, with regards to also projecting itself as a reliable fallback option for these economies that have been at the forefront of this impact of the tariff measures by President Trump. With regards also especially portraying itself more in a more positive light to ASEAN economies, to the European economies, to global South powers also. And hence we have seen how these repeated ventures and overtures being seen by Germany now, by President Merz, by Canada, by the UK, and by different powers of late. And hence we have seen how China is trying to justify that and trying to differentiate itself from the often unpredictable economic policies of President Trump.
Thank you so much for your perspective. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
The physics was known for quite a while, and so that I think it hasn't really changed our understanding the quantum world work.
The job with the James Webb Space Telescope was to look as far back in time as we could to see the universe as it was young.
Changing the basic attitude about what education is for and what it needs to be.
Biology, medical studies, they make great progress.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. You are watching Trending Tech on NewsX World, where we bring you the latest tech breakthroughs and trends from around the world. An innovation from National Institute of Technology Rourkela Stop Bleed has received approval from the Central Drug Standards Control Organization as a Class C medical device. Developed by Miquel's Meadow Solutions Private Limited, this nano biopolymer hemostat is designed to rapidly control severe bleeding in trauma situations, including road accidents, military injuries, and industrial accidents. The technology offers a quick-acting solution that can be used by both medical professions and non-medical first responders. Its 3-year shelf life and easy of use make it ideal for emergency cases, potentially saving countless lives in rural and military settings. Founded by Mr. Sabir Hussain, the startup is now focusing on scaling the Stop Bleed product and integrating it into India's emergency healthcare system. This product is aligned with India's Make in India vision, aiming to reduce import dependence and strengthen the country's trauma care infrastructure. To discuss all of this and more, joining us now is Professor Devendra Verma. He is an associate professor and head of Department of Biotechnology and Medical Engineering at the National Institute of Technology Rourkela. Professor Verma has been with the institution since 2014, specialising in biomaterials, tissue engineering and wound healing. He holds a PhD from North Dakota State University and has dedicated his research to advancing medical technologies, including those in the field of trauma care. Thank you for joining us, Professor Verma. My first question to you is, how does Stop Bleed improve the current methods for controlling bleeding in emergency situations?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. So right now what happens, like when there is a bleeding, blood has a capacity to clot itself. But in case of severe injury, blood is not able to clot, and so the too much of bleeding may lead to death of the person. So here comes the role of hemostats. Their role is to clot blood as soon as possible and save the person's life. But the problem with the currently available hemostat is that either they are costly or they may require some training to use, or in some cases it has been seen that they tend to stick to the wound, and so requires some additional time to remove, and also it may cause while removing they may cause rebleeding also. So that's why we developed this Stop Bleed hemostat. It's very easy to use, anybody without training can use, and also it's very effective, like it's take very short time to clot blood, and doesn't require anything. It easily comes off from a wound. So, it minimizes the chance of rebleeding also.
And can you explain the technology behind Stop Bleed and how it works to control hemorrhage?
Yeah, so it is based on nanofibrous biopolymers. So the biopolymers means the polymers which are derived from the natural sources. So it has, since it is a nanofibrous, so it has very high surface area, and it interacts with the the clotting factors of the blood and quickly absorb the blood plasma, and that's how it accelerate the clotting cascade. And that's how it forms a hydrogen. It interacts with the blood and forms hydrogen, act as a sealant over the bleeding site and prevents further bleeding.
And what were the key challenges in developing Stop Bleed and getting it approved by CDSCO?
Yeah, so like it was developed at NIT Rourkela. Initially, we had some tests at NIT Rourkela, and we found very promising results, and that's why we decided to take it further from the lab to hospitals and other applications. So like initially we didn't have much knowledge about what are the different requirements for getting a CDSCO approval. So we approached different agency, and we got good support from CDSCO and also MedTech Mitra. MedTech Mitra is basically a organization which is supported by the Niti Aayog, CDSCO and ICMR, and we got a lot of help from MedTech Mitra. And then the next challenge we faced was manufacturing it, because manufacturing any biomedical device requires special facilities, and this kind of facilities were very rare at that time in India. So it took a lot of time also for getting a facility where we can manufacture this hemostat. So these are some of the challenges we faced getting into the this stage right now.
And what impact do you believe Stop Bleed will have on trauma care in rural and remote areas of India?
Yeah, so basically we have developed this Stop Bleed for field application. So field application where the doctors are not available. So if you look at the example of hospitals, there surgeon and doctors have many ways to stop to control bleeding. But in rural area, especially where there is no trained person or no any equipment available to stop bleeding, and too much of bleeding may lead to death of patient. So this is actually called preventable deaths, because if you can control the bleeding like as soon as possible, then the death of the patient can be saved. Sorry, the life of the patient can be saved. So there, because this hemostat is easy to use, can be used by untrained person, so it will help in saving many lives in the rural area.
And how do you envision Stop Bleed being used in military settings and combat situations?
Yes, in combat setting also, bleeding can cause death of soldiers. So there also, it will be very, very helpful in saving lives of our soldiers. So again, in field application like combat area where the proper medical facilities may not be available. So in there also, it can be used without any training, and cost is also not that high. So compared to other products available, so it's going to be very, very effective, and also it will save many of soldiers' life.
And what role do you see healthcare startups playing in reducing India's dependence on imported medical technologies?
Yeah, so right now we have lot of medical devices are imported, and that also add to the cost of the medical devices. So these medical devices are sometimes are out of the reach of common people. So startups have very critical role actually in developing indigenous medical devices, so that they are effective, and also they are cost effective also. So it's very, very important. Startups can has to develop more medical devices, so that they can also support Make India policy policies also.
And in terms of usability, how easy is stop bleed to apply in high stress environments such as road accidents or military operations?
Yes, so basically we have developed in powder form, so it comes in the box like this. So just whenever it's required, just open the box and then pour the powder. It's it comes with powder. So it's very easy. It's very easy. It doesn't require any training. So we have developed in these two forms. One is in powder form and also one is pellet form. So powder form basically is useful for where the bleeding is occurring from the large area. So it can be powder can be spread over the large area and then it will help in further bleeding. Pellet basically we have developed for the bleeding where bleeding is occurring from the localized location or localized wound. So pellet can be used, and it has found that it can pellet form is effective for severe bleeding conditions also. So yeah, training wise doesn't require much. Anybody can use it. Just open the box, pour it on the wound, and press it for at least for 2 minutes. That is enough.
Amazing. And what do you think about the situation of healthcare in India? What policy changes do you think is needed?
So basically, I think we need more of facilities, basically manufacturing facilities. As I was saying that, we had tough time getting a facility where we can manufacture. So we need more of facilities where medical devices can be manufactured, because manufacturing of medical devices is a cost-intensive process, and startups, early startups, they don't have that much of funds available to start their own manufacturing facilities. So government support in this area will greatly help to support Make in India initiatives.
And what are the potential global applications for stop bleed beyond India, particularly in conflict zones or areas with limited healthcare access?
Yeah, we see that it can be used globally in other countries, and that's why we have secured patents in other countries also. The patents for this stop bleed has been this hemostatic technology has been we have filed patents in 7 countries, and we have already got patents from 4 countries like Australia, USA, China, and also from Israel. So we see that there is a global requirement of hemostatic technology like this, and definitely it will be helpful in those countries also, many other countries also, where the healthcare facilities like remote area where it's not available, or combat zones where proper medical facilities are generally not available. So it can be very, very useful in saving patients' life there also.
Thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of Trending Tech. Thank you. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of Trending Tech. For more tech updates and innovation, stay tuned to NewsX World.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Trump delivers his State of the Union address. It is a record-length speech of 1 hour and 45 minutes. Democrats boycott address and rally outside the Capitol. Here is everything you need to know about this year's State of the Union speech.
Hello, I am Ellie Richardson and you are watching another episode of Explained with me. Today we discuss Trump's State of the Union speech. US President Donald Trump delivered the longest State of the Union address since the American Presidency Project began recording speeches in 1964, speaking for 108 minutes and breaking the previous modern era record. Donald Trump now holds the record for the longest State of the Union address at 1 hour and 47 minutes in February 2026. His 2019 address also ranks high, lasting 1 hour 22 minutes, while his 2018 speech was 1 hour 20 minutes. Bill Clinton followed closely with 1 hour 28 minutes in 2000 and 1 hour 24 minutes in 1995. Meanwhile, the shortest State of the Union belongs to Richard Nixon, who spoke for just 28 minutes and 55 seconds in January 1972. House Speaker Mike Johnson stated that Trump had a lot of good news for the American people and that he could have gone on for longer. While the speech was greatly appreciated by Republicans, Democrats boycotted the address and held counter rallies during the speech. The rally, which started an hour before Trump made his address, featured speakers including prominent senators and advocacy leaders who denounced Trump's policies as harmful to ordinary Americans, calling for urgent action to address issues like corruption, inequality, and threats to civil liabilities. Let's in fact listen into what some Democratic leaders had to say.
The State of the Union is this. This union is in crisis right now. Our cities are under attack by lawless law enforcement. Our democracy is wilting under ceaseless attack from a president who wants to be a despot. Millions of Americans are losing their health care because the president has chosen corruption to pad the pockets of his billionaire friends instead of helping average Americans. You're not going to hear any of that in that speech tonight.
Happening there. They want to call that the State of the Union. It is the state of denial. Because what's going to happen under that Capitol is a bunch of lies. Lies that Donald Trump and the Republicans are going to tell us about how great this country is doing right now. But what is true, what is happening right now is that Donald Trump and the Republicans have made this country sicker, poorer, and less secure.
But what constituted to Trump's speech? Trump made some big claims during his address. He talked about Biden letting in what he called 12,000 murderers. He also claimed that there was rampant election fraud in the United States. He reiterated his claim of ending 8 wars, including avoiding a nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan. Trump criticized the Supreme Court on their decision about his tariff policy. But among these claims, what were the big topics missing from his speech? Trump missed out on the Minnesota protests and deaths. A wave of national protests erupted over Trump's migration policy and the tactics of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICU nurse Alex Pretty, 37, was killed 3 weeks after Renee Good was also shot dead by an immigration agent in Minnesota. There was also no mention of Epstein files. Millions of redacted files relating to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein were released by the US Department of Justice by the end of January. Trump had mandated that all Epstein-related documents be shared with the public. There was also silence on Greenland. Trump repeatedly insisted earlier this year that the US needs Greenland for its national security. He said in January that he would not take the territory by force, as Denmark and NATO allies made it clear that they would not give in to his calls to replenish sovereignty. Trump also used his address to award medals of honor to various people. Here's who was recognized. Royce Williams, a 100-year-old veteran Navy fighter pilot who downed 4 Soviet aircraft in the Korean War, received the Medal of Honor. Scott Ruskin, who's a Coast Guard rescue swimmer, credited with saving more than 160 people from floodwaters in Texas last year. He received the Legion of Merit Award. Andrew Wolf, National Guardsman shot in Washington, D.C. in November, received the Purple Heart. The family of Sarah Beckstorm, who was shot dead while on patrol in Washington, D.C., also received the Purple Heart. Eric Slover, who's a helicopter pilot who was shot 4 times during the military operation to seize Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, received the Medal of Honor. Connor Hellebuyck, Olympic gold-winning hockey team USA goaltender, received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, although this will be presented at a later date. Now, let's listen in to some important parts of the speech where the US President speaks about the nuclear talks with Iran and ending 8 wars in his term.
And just over the last couple of months with the protests, they've killed at least, it looks like, 32,000 protesters. 32,000 protesters in their own country. They shot them and hung them. We stopped them from hanging a lot of them with the threat of serious violence. But this is some terrible people. They've already developed missiles that can threaten Europe and our bases overseas, and they're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America. After Midnight Hammer, they were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons. Yet they continue. They're starting it all over. We wiped it out, and they want to start all over again, and are at this moment again pursuing their sinister ambitions. We are in negotiations with them. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon. We're proudly restoring safety for Americans at home, and we are also restoring security for Americans abroad. Our country has never been stronger. In my first 10 months, I ended 8 wars, including Cambodia. Isn't it funny? Sick people. Cambodia and Thailand, Pakistan and India. Would have been a nuclear war. 35 million people, said the Prime Minister of Pakistan, would have died if it were not for my involvement. Kosovo and Serbia, Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, the Congo and Rwanda, and of course the war in Gaza, which proceeds at a very low level. It's just about there. And I want to thank Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner for your help. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Jared. And we're working very hard to end the 9th war, the killing and slaughter between Russia and Ukraine, where 25,000 soldiers are dying each and every month. Think of that, 25,000 soldiers are dying a month. A war which would have never happened if I were president, would have never happened. As president, I will make peace wherever I can, but I will never hesitate to confront threats to America wherever we must.
The speech was followed by various reactions by Democrats and Republicans. Delivering the Democratic response to President Donald Trump's State of the Union address, Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger sharply criticized the administration's policies, accusing the president of deepening economic inequality, undermining public trust, and sowing division while failing to address pressing challenges facing the nation. Listen in.
Because since this president took office last year, his reckless trade policies have forced American families to pay more than $1,700 each in tariff costs. Small businesses have suffered, farmers have suffered, some losing entire markets. Everyday Americans are paying the price. And even though the Supreme Court struck these tariffs down 4 days ago, the damage to us, the American people, has already been done. Meanwhile, our president told us tonight that we are safer because these agents arrest mothers and detain children. Think about that. Our broken immigration system is something to be fixed, not an excuse for unaccountable agents to terrorize our communities.
Democrats sharply criticised the address as devised and detached from American struggles, while Republicans praised what they called a record of delivered promises. Democratic Representative Melanie Stansbury said the speech was a pack of lies and disturbingly diverse, while Senator Chris Coons said Trump's claims on healthcare, tariffs and the economy were wildly inaccurate and accused him of turning the address into more of a campaign rally. Republicans countered the Trump highlighted tangible gains on border security and costs. Listen in.
Extremely divisive speech, to see him literally calling Democrats names and jeering. But more than that, it was just a pack of lies. It's the same old thing that we've seen out of Donald Trump over and over again, where he's trying to gaslight the American people, trying to pretend like the economy is doing well, trying to pretend like everything is normal. And as my sign said last year, this is not normal.
I had hoped to hear a unifying speech where President...
The physics was known for quite a while.
Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran and the United States hold a third round of indirect nuclear talks in Geneva as Washington builds up forces in the Middle East. Both sides say they want diplomacy but warn they will respond if the other resorts to military action. Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai wins an appeal overturning his 2022 fraud conviction, with the court quashing the guilty verdict and sentence. The ruling comes days after he was jailed on separate national security charges and he remains in custody. Russia launches a wave of missile and drone attacks across Ukraine, wounding at least 8 people ahead of high-level talks between Kyiv and Washington to end the war. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko says the capital suffers damage to a residential building and multiple fires as the conflict enters its 5th year. Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton are set to appear before the House Oversight Committee in its investigation into the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The depositions are scheduled to take place in Chappaqua, New York, where the couple reside. Cuba's Interior Ministry says Border Patrol forces engage in a shootout with a U.S. speedboat, killing 4 people. Authorities say the vessel carries a Florida license plate with the U.S. state located about 145 kilometers from the island. South Korea and the United Arab Emirates sign a defense cooperation MOU worth more than $35 billion, according to Seoul's presidential envoy. President Lee Jae-myung's chief of staff, Kang Hoon-sik, says the projects cover air defense as well as air force and naval capabilities. The USS Gerald R. Ford departs Crete after a supply stop as President Donald Trump sends the carrier strike group to the Middle East. The move comes amid a broader US military buildup as Washington weighs possible action against Iran. Russia questions how President Donald Trump's proposed Board of Peace would coexist with the United Nations Security Council, saying the UN remains the only recognized global authority on peace and security. Moscow raises concerns after Washington, the only permanent council member to join, says the body could expand beyond Gaza to address other global conflicts. We start this hour in Geneva, where the third round of nuclear talks between the United States and Iran is reportedly set to focus solely on Iran's nuclear program and the lifting of sanctions. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson has confirmed that Tehran will push for the lifting of sanctions while also asserting its right to peaceful nuclear energy use. Oman's foreign minister Sayed Badr al-Sabdi is in Geneva to mediate the crucial talks. Reports say that the head of the UN nuclear watchdog, Rafael Grossi, is also expected to join the ongoing negotiations. These talks come after a series of high-stakes diplomatic moves, including a major US military buildup in the region, and as US President Donald Trump continues to voice strong opposition to Iran's nuclear ambitions. In response, Iran's president has reiterated that the country is not seeking nuclear weapons and that its nuclear program is for civilian purposes only. Joining us to discuss the ongoing escalations between Tehran and Washington is Dr. Asta Chadha, an associate professor of international relations. He joins us from Ritsu Mikan University in Kyoto, Japan. Thank you so much, Dr. Chadha, for joining us in this discussion. And on a pressing issue, these third round of talks are kicking off today with the Iranian delegation certainly arriving in Geneva. They are there right now. We have yet to get news whether Jared Kushner and Witkoff are there. However, what is at stake today? We are seeing a huge build-up in the Middle East. If things go well, what can we expect? Another round of talks, more negotiations, and what's the worst-case scenario at the end of today?
Yeah, thank you for having me on your channel to discuss this pertinent issue. I've been following this news, and as you mentioned, today's talks would pretty much decide the course of action for both sides, for the United States as well as for Iran. You asked me what is at stake. A lot. For Iran, the economy is in a very dire state. They definitely need this deal to go through. Look at the inflation rate in Iran, which is close to 60%. They are suffering from widespread civil unrest. Protests are occurring across more than 30 of its provinces. The administration has so far, I would say, failed to contain those protests. They have also failed to respond to people's demands. So reaching a deal for them is a matter not just of making sure that they maintain their economic security, but also important for them to be able to maintain the regime in itself. So too much is at stake for Iran here. For United States, on the other hand, I think we need to look at it specifically from President Trump and his administration's perspective. For them, being able to broker a deal, being able to put pressure on Iranian administration to promise to never build a nuclear program, to make sure that they never ever reattempt a re-establishment of this program in the future. The fact that US has a huge military buildup that you were earlier mentioning, including aircraft carrier strike groups, that itself raises the stakes of security in the region. Because if, and that was your second question, what would happen if this doesn't work out? I mean, if it doesn't work out, we could very much be on the cusp of seeing yet another conflict breaking out in the Middle East, which is why we see a lot of Middle Eastern players also interested in looking at or observing where this deal goes. On another note, just talking about it from a regional security perspective, this potential deal also has the capability of establishing sort of a template for a roadmap as to what kind of discussions can go on further, because this is neither the first time nor the last time any Middle Eastern power would want to develop nuclear capabilities or ballistic missile capabilities. So for United States to maintain its hegemony, for the bigger powers to ensure that there is no other nuclear power challenging that hegemony or challenging regional peace, the future of this deal pretty much will decide what path the regional security will take, specifically in the Middle East.
And briefly, Dr. Chadha, we are getting reports that the UN nuclear watchdog head, Rafael Grossi, will be at the talks as well. How and why is this individual important to these talks, and what's their relationship with Iran currently?
I mean, let's understand that Iran so far has promised, and that was the significance of the first two rounds that were held, first in Muscat and then in Geneva, that Iran had promised or kind of agreed to discuss halting its nuclear weapons program. But what they did not want to, or what they still do not want to discuss is, any concessions on its ballistic missiles program. And, in that sense, Iran is trying to walk a very fine line here by making sure that the only an aspect of their national security or nuclear buildup is discussed and not everything else is. So the presence of the nuclear watchdog is very important here, because it is very, very likely that they might want to actually bring to the table the discussion of the entire range of Iran's missile programs, which has been for United States a major sticking point for a very long time. And, to tell you the truth, it sounds to me like for President Trump and his administration, a win is not just a signed deal, but a win would really be to make sure that they can avoid yet another Middle Eastern war, while simultaneously allowing Iran, to take that step towards completely abandoning its nuclear ambitions. That would truly sound like a deal and a success. So probably the very fact that a lot of parties to this discussion, whether it's the United States, whether it's the nuclear watchdog, whether it's Muscat, they are gathering here because they do have hope that they probably might arrive at some sort of agreement.
Okay, we'll keep tabs on that. Dr. Chadha, do stay with us. We have another related development coming up. Reactions are coming in from around the world, and China is urging all parties to exercise restraint amid escalating tensions involving Iran. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has stressed its commitment to political and diplomatic solutions, opposing the use or threat of force. Moreover, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning has expressed support for Iran in maintaining national stability and legitimate rights. Let's in fact listen in to her statement.
我们正在密切关注伊朗局势的发展。中方一贯主张通过政治外交途径解决问题，反对在国际关系中使用或威胁使用武力。中国和伊朗两国人民传统友好，中方支持伊朗政府和人民维护国家稳定和正当权益，希望各方珍惜和平，保持克制，通过对话解决分歧。中方愿为此继续发挥负责任大国作用。
We now turn to Europe, where President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has reported that Russia has launched a massive attack on Kyiv's energy infrastructure overnight, firing 420 drones and 39 missiles at critical facilities across 8 regions. The attack, which targeted gas infrastructure in Poltava and electricity substations in Kyiv and Dnipro, left dozens injured, including children. Many residential buildings were also struck, compounding the damage to civilian areas. The attack came after a call between Zelensky and US President Donald Trump ahead of peace talks in Geneva. Despite Ukraine's air defense systems intercepting most of the incoming missiles, several managed to strike their targets, underscoring the vulnerability of Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The Ukrainian president has expressed gratitude for international assistance, but warned that constant vigilance and aid are necessary to protect the country's energy grid. Zelensky's calls for continued support and preparedness come as Russia's efforts to cripple Ukraine's infrastructure continue, with energy systems being a primary focus of the assault. Dr. Chadha joins us once again to discuss Europe's defining crisis. Of course, the Ukrainians continue to suffer a bitter cold as Russia and Moscow aims for their infrastructure. But we have a meeting in Geneva coming up, a bilateral meeting between the United States and Ukraine. The Trump administration, where do you think it currently stands? We've obviously seen a real flip-flapping over Donald Trump's tenure, his second time in the White House. Going into these talks, should Ukrainians feel positive or otherwise?
Right, I mean, very important question you asked there. I mean, let's look at the scenario of this conflict. It doesn't look very likely that either of the parties are going to walk away, despite if the peace talks were to be successful, with too much of a win. They're already losing a lot. Russia seems to be, on the front foot here, trying to attack the gas and energy infrastructures in Ukraine, possibly to make not just small territorial gains. They are not too large, but seems like they do want to have a leverage when the final discussion takes place in Geneva, when there is, and in fact, a three-way summit, which, according to Trump administration, would be there, the way they would want to conduct these talks, to have Russia and Ukraine sitting side by side and becoming parties to the very talks for ending the war that they're both engaged in. And Russia seems to be here trying to weaponize winters in some way, expose the critical and the serious nature of these critical infrastructure in Ukraine. The fact that Ukraine stands very, very vulnerable. The fact that they are trying to build this leverage by using this battlefield pressure against Ukraine. And the fact that, Russia seems to be wanting to force Ukraine to divert its pressure, air defense and financial resources away from the front lines, because now they have to repair civilian grids. They'll have to go and repair the gas infrastructure that is being destroyed. And then I'm not even talking about the huge economic cost and the cost of reconstruction that would need to be undertaken by someone. So what is Ukraine fighting for here, apart from its sovereignty? Also fighting for its security guarantee. Something that allows it to make sure and ensure that Russia would not attempt to violate yet another ceasefire in any way. So, I mean, what is the possibility that the US could in some way be able to, what is US planning to do in this case? I suppose is by bringing both these parties. It's very obvious that Russia has built this leverage through battlefield pressure, but the idea would be to make sure that this conflict stops as soon as possible. Yes, would Ukraine have to possibly give up some of its territory? I mean, following up from the previous talks and the way they have progressed, it's highly likely that Ukraine might be asked to allow some of those captured territories to work as the buffer, rather than Russia being coerced in some way to give up those territories that it has gained as a result of this conflict. I mean, again, overall, the scenario does not sound very positive, but Trump administration seems to be pushing very hard for this settlement. But I think the true end of this war would depend largely on what sort of security guarantees can US and Europeans give to Ukraine in the long run, because a short-term deal or a short-term peace does not guarantee that this war cannot break out again. So that too much is at stake, I would say, in Ukraine.
Dr. Chatter, thank you so much for taking the time in speaking to us. Always a great pleasure to get your input on these issues. We'll, of course, continue to cover those talks in Geneva as they progress, but we move on to some related news. According to reports, Russia has handed Ukraine the bodies of 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers in exchange for 35 Russian soldiers' remains. This exchange is part of a series of periodic body transfers between the two nations, which have been taking place throughout the ongoing conflict. The announcement came on February the 26th, as the war marked its 4th anniversary. The exchange reflects the ongoing efforts to address the tragic losses on both sides, even amid continued hostilities. Russia and Ukraine have previously exchanged bodies of war dead, and this latest handover further highlights the human cost of ongoing conflict. Both nations remain deeply entrenched in the war, with the recent transfer underlining the brutality faced by their armed forces. Now we turn over to Asia's east, where German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has stated that he has discussed ending the Russia-Ukraine war with the Chinese President Xi Jinping during his state visit to China. He has added that he hoped that Xi understood the importance of ending the war. Meanwhile, on the second day of his visit, Merz has toured the Forbidden City in Beijing. Merz has also been given a test drive on a Mercedes-Benz's new S-Class by Sedan, the car maker of CEO Ola Kalanius. Merz and Kalaneas spoke briefly inside the new vehicle before the German Chancellor gave a brief speech at a hotel near Beijing's capital international airport. His trip has shown that bilateral exchange and cultivating ties are seen as a high priority in Berlin, a spokesperson for the German carmaker said, adding that personal contacts with China are important for preserving economic ties. Merz has called for partnership and dialogue with China, aimed at resetting relations that have been clouded by yawning trade deficit with the world's second largest economy. The German Chancellor will depart for Hangzhou in the eastern province later to continue his first visit to China. Joining us now to discuss this is Alison Mutler, the former Associated Press Bureau Chief. She joins us live from Spain. Alison, thank you so much for taking the time. Of course, Germany, Europe's largest economy, and meeting the largest economy in Asia, the second largest in the world. What does Merz want from this visit? Apologies, Alison, I think you might be on mute. Okay, we are...
Here we are. Yeah,
Brilliant.
yeah.
Yes,
Sorry, Thomas. As you said, the visit is twofold. It's very important for Germany, which is Europe's biggest economy, to have good relations with China, the world's second biggest economy. As you said, the relations have been clouded of late, and Germany, I think, would like to reset it, particularly as the geopolitical force is moving eastward. The United States is becoming more of an unreliable partner. It's still an important partner, but Europe needs to find more markets in the east, and China is huge. The EU already has a new trade agreement with India, another huge market. So I think it's very important, particularly as this is this yawning trade deficit. China exports much more to the EU than the other way around, and that doesn't make Germany or any of the other European countries that happy. So I think his presence there is sent a message. We consider you important. He's not just sort of flying into Beijing and flying out. He's going to other places too tomorrow, and it's the first visit, I think, by him as when he was Chancellor. And the other reason he's there, which is equally important for Europe, is security. Security in the sense of the Ukraine-Russia war, which is now gone into its fifth year. Now, we all know that China is a senior partner to Russia, so it has leverage over the Kremlin, and Europe is very worried about this war going on, but not just that, potential future aggression by Russia. We're hearing warnings that we are no longer, as Merz said last year, we are no longer at peace with Russia. We hear warnings from various generals in Europe, including in the United Kingdom, that war with Russia is almost inevitability, we're told, in a few years' time. So I think that Merz wants to speak seriously to the senior partner with Russia to say these are our concerns and we believe that you have influence and you can help. So it's a very big diplomatic visit, and it's twofold. It's economic, it's trade, but it's also security.
And this, of course, follows a flurry of Western leaders that have visited China over the past few months. We've seen Keir Starmer, Mark Carney, of course. We have Donald Trump set to visit in April. What does this mean for the West and balancing that relationship when it comes to China, which, of course, is a manufacturing and economic superpower with, of course, the possibility of it being a national security threat at the same time?
Well, I think Western leaders here, you spoke about Canada, Britain, and now Germany, want to play carefully with China. China is a different kind of player than Russia, for example, but they want to, if you like, keep on their good side and keep up relationships, not ignore them, give them the attention that they think that they would appreciate. I think I'm sure Beijing appreciates all these high-level visits. And as I said, it's both things. It's firstly because of the economy, because a lot of the Western economies are dependent on, if you like, cheap China imports, but also the security, because China has a different way of going about these things. It's not like Russia. It wants to create influence in certain regions, and it's managed for example, in Europe to some extent, and or particularly in the Balkans, in Africa. So I think Europe doesn't want to, and the West doesn't want to lose out, and it wants to make sure it has good relations with China because it is the world's second largest economy, and it is growing in terms of geopolitics and strategy. So I think Europe wants to be there when things change and to have a working, at least a working relationship, and certainly not a hostile relationship with Beijing.
Alison Mutler, thank you so much. Do stay with us as we turn over to the United States for our next story, where the Federal Bureau has fired at least half of a dozen agents linked to a probe in 2022 into the US President Donald Trump retaining documents at his Mar-a-Lago residence. American media has reported yesterday, drawing anger from the association representing personnel of the US Investigatory Bureau. The FBI raided Trump's residence in Florida in 2022 when he was out of office as part of a now dropped investigation into the mishandling of classified documents after his first White House term. According to reports, FBI Director Kash Patel has ordered the firing of at least 6 agents over their work on the case. Alison Mutler joins us once again. Critics here say that Donald Trump is punishing his political opponents. These individuals who search his Mar-a-Lago residence during the time when Joe Biden was in office. Do you see Donald Trump as doing that? Do you think that's an accurate statement?
Well, it does very much look like that. We know that Donald Trump didn't accept the outcome of the 2020 election, and I remember there were reports at the time that he'd taken documents from the FBI that he wasn't entitled to, so that a search was carried out. And it does look like, without knowing all the ins and outs, it does look very much that it's political payback time. And the head of the FBI realizes that Donald Trump is president and therefore has fired these six agents. So to me, it does look political. I don't know. Why is it happening now? Why didn't it happen if they did it in 2022? If there was a suspicion of wrongdoing, why weren't they investigated far earlier? It's 4 hours later. So it really does. The optics, it looks very political. It looks like political payback from Donald Trump.
Yes, Alison Mutler, thank you so much for taking the time in joining us. Always a great pleasure to have you here on the broadcast. We now stay in Europe for our next story, and Spain's new migrant legalization plan, aiming to grant legal status to at least 500,000 undocumented migrants, is facing growing uncertainty and strain on immigration services. The program, set to run from April to June, has created long queues outside consulates and immigration offices as migrants scramble to gather the necessary documentation. However, confusion over specific requirements and a lack of additional resources or staffing have left many applicants anxious. Migrants who have been in Spain for at least 5 months or who applied for asylum before the end of 2025 can apply, but the final details remain unclear. Concerns are rising over the ability of Spain's overwhelming immigration system to process such a large number of applications. Unions warn of potential chaos without more support, as the lack of clarity has also fueled an illegal market for appointment slots and paid services. Let's take a listen in.
Oui, souvent j'ai peur. Souvent j'ai peur quand je vois souvent les policiers ou bien je descends du terrain, je vis les contrôles, souvent j'ai peur. Parce que ici, sans papier, c'est un peu dangereux. Ça va aider beaucoup de personnes. Comme exemple, moi, je suis là depuis 2023. Je n'ai pas encore de résidence, j'avais permission de travail pour un peu de temps. Mais d'ici quelques mois, ça finit. Après, si je n'ai pas de résidence, je ne vais pas travailler. La vie ici, ça sera difficile.
A 14-year-old Palestinian boy, Jad Jadala, was shot dead by Israeli soldiers last November in the West Bank. He lay untreated for over 30 minutes as soldiers blocked ambulances from reaching him. Despite claims by the IDF of providing initial medical treatment, witnesses and paramedics deny this. Jad's family accuses the soldiers of planting a rock next to him to frame him. His body is yet to be returned and the cause of his death remains unclear. According to a Bloomberg report, Apple is in talks with several Indian banks to launch its Apple Pay service in India. The banks reportedly include ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank and Axis Bank, along with other global card networks. Apple's aim is to introduce the service around the middle of 2026. However, this report has not been verified by independent parties yet, and we are still expecting major details to be disclosed in the coming days. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching The World Reports on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran and the US hold the latest round of talks in Geneva aimed at resolving their long-standing nuclear dispute and averting new US strikes on Iran following a large-scale military build-up. The two countries renewed negotiations, hoping to tackle a decades-long standoff over Tehran's nuclear program. Cuban forces killed 4 people and wounded 6 others aboard a Florida-registered speedboat that entered Cuban waters and opened fire on a Cuban patrol, the government said at a time of heightened tensions with the United States. The United States has eased an oil embargo on Cuba, but Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the communist-run island must change dramatically, saying it had only itself to blame for the economic crisis. Former US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is set to testify behind closed doors before a congressional committee investigating the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and his accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. Former President Bill Clinton is scheduled to answer questions the following day. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has said that he and the US President Donald Trump agreed that the next session of trilateral talks in March on a war settlement should lead to a meeting of the country's leaders. Jimmy Lai, the jailed pro-democracy tycoon, won an appeal overturning his 2022 fraud conviction. The Court of Appeal quashed the conviction, but Lai remains in jail. The death toll from the heavy rains in Brazil's southern eastern state has risen to 46. Flooding and landslides displaced around 3,600 people in the cities of Juiz de Fora and Uba, while 21 people remain missing. The US is blocking the Venezuelan government from paying for Nicolas Maduro's legal representative in the drug trafficking case he faces in New York. Maduro and his wife both pleaded not guilty to drug trafficking charges. And for your top stories this hour, ahead of talks in Geneva between the US and Iranian delegations, Vice President J.D. Vance said the United States sees evidence that Iran is trying to rebuild its nuclear program after US-led strikes against Iranian nuclear sites in June. Vance said that the principle is very simple and Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Listen in.
Well, I'm not going to make any news on Iran today, Caitlin. I'll let the president make those announcements. As you know, he is sending 2 of his best negotiators to Geneva tomorrow in order to continue to try to strike the best deal possible for the American people. But the principle is very simple. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they try to rebuild a nuclear weapon, that causes problems for us. And in fact, we've seen evidence that they have tried to do exactly that. So the president sending those negotiators to try to address that problem, as the president has said repeatedly, he wants to address that problem diplomatically, but of course the president has other options.
Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi expressed optimism for an equitable deal, but insisted Iran will not forgo its right to peaceful nuclear technology. As tensions rise, the US has increased its military presence in the Middle East, with Iran threatening retaliation if attacked. President Trump has given Iran 10 to 15 days to reach an agreement. Listen in.
This afternoon, in order to have the 3rd round of our talks with the US team. And we have made some progress last time. We were able to find some sort of understandings. And I think based on those understandings, we can build something in the form of an agreement, a deal. I think a fair, balanced, and equitable deal is achievable.
We are now being joined by Peter Baum, who is an editor of Weekly Blitz, and he is joining us from London. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us here today on NewsX World. How should we interpret the US assertion that it sees evidence of Iran attempting to rebuild a nuclear weapon, and how credible is that claim?
Yes, all the research that's been done in the last few months seems to give credibility to that claim that indeed Iran is trying to continue on its nuclear program. How successful that's been, we don't know. And I think it would be very difficult for Iran to get back to where they were pre the 12-day bombardment that they suffered. Nevertheless, as you quite rightly said, that there's going to be further talks. But the thing that's been consistent, which is quite unusual for Donald Trump and his administration in all this, is the actual deliberate consistency in which he has continuously stated the 4 red lines that the US administration want to impose on Iran. And those 4 red lines and demands have been clear. The first one is stop uranium enrichment. The second is non-production of ballistic missiles. The third is stop arming and funding their proxies. And the fourth is to stop the clampdown, the violent clampdown on the domestic protesters. Unusually for Trump, he has been totally consistent with those demands, and his administration, whether it's through Vance or Rubio, continuously support that. Now, I don't see that the Iranians have any room for to be flexible on this. And given the consistency of Trump's demands, I don't think Trump will back down on this. So it's truly up to the Iranians to show a great degree of flexibility should they wish to avoid military conflict, which, as we all know, the Trump administration have been building up their military hardware in the area for weeks now. I don't think Trump can climb down from not using his military unless the Iranians give in to his demands.
And is it realistic to believe a nuclear deal remains achievable when both sides express such deeply contrasting positions?
And no, I don't think it is, because one thing is for sure, that the Trump administration do not trust the Iranians. and of course vice versa is true as well. So, and the Iranians have very little room for manoeuvre simply because they are the weakest they've ever been, politically, militarily, domestically, for nearly 50 years now. So I think the onus is really on the Iranians, should they wish to avoid conflict, to be as flexible as they can and give in to some of Trump's demands, which will be very unpalatable for them, but nevertheless, if they wish to avoid military conflict, they will have to do that.
And does the shadow of potential military escalation strengthen or weaken prospects for a diplomatic agreement on Iran's nuclear program?
Well, again, as I have suggested, I think it will strengthen the prospects for a diplomatic solution only if the Iranians bow to Trump's demands. He's got a gun to their head and they have very little room for manoeuvre. So depending on how strong the Iranians want to retain power will determine how flexible they are during this current round of negotiations. I'm very, very pessimistic about this because I think the Iranians will try and resist as much as they possibly can Trump's demands, and Trump has given them, I think you suggested 10 to 15 days. I think that time frame is probably more like 8 to 10 days now from the time he first mentioned it.
Thank you, Peter, but don't go too far as we'll be back with you very shortly. Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has said Iran must engage in talks with the United States to stop supporting armed proxies like Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. Speaking alongside his Belgian counterpart Maxime Prevot, emphasised Germany's special responsibility for Israel's security. Meanwhile, Iran's President Massoud expressed hope for a positive outcome from the upcoming nuclear talks with the US as a delegation heads to Geneva for the third round of discussions. Listen in.
Wenn Teheran die Lage nüchtern analysiert, dann sollte es erkennen, dass es in diesen 3 Bereichen auf die USA zugehen sollte. Das ist auch die Erwartung Europas, denn auch wir werden dadurch bedroht. Es muss die Unterstützung von Hamas, Hezbollah und Houthis aufgeben. Und das sage ich insbesondere als deutscher Außenminister, der eine besondere Verantwortung für die Sicherheit des Staates Israel hat. Das sind Punkte, die wir seit längerem der iranischen Regierung vortragen und wo wir bisher zu wenig Kompromissbereitschaft erkannt haben. Ich hoffe, dass Teheran jetzt erkennt, dass es an der Zeit ist, hier Zugeständnisse zu machen und endlich eine konstruktivere Rolle in der Weltgemeinschaft einzunehmen.
We are now being joined back by Peter Baum. Thank you for joining us back here today. Can pressuring Iran to cut ties with groups like Hamas realistically advance peace efforts in the Middle East?
Yes, it can. And what we're seeing here, Ellie, is a united front from the members of the European Union supporting one of Trump's 4 demands that Iran stop arming and supporting their proxies, in this case Hezbollah. Now, very recently, the Israelis have been taking out weapons depots in Lebanon, where Hezbollah are still relatively strong, and they had remarkable success just a couple of days ago, what they would consider to be a remarkable success, when they eliminated, I think, 10 of Hezbollah's top commanders in Lebanon in what was obviously a targeted strike from which they received intelligence from their sources in Lebanon. Now, with the Germans making such strong demands from Iran, this again will pressure the Iranians further to cede to one of Trump's red lines, which is stop arming their proxies. Further pressure being brought on them by members of the European Union, Germany being a very important country within that union, obviously. So, and Lebanon themselves are actually trying to disarm Hezbollah, although at the moment the Lebanese army doesn't have the competencies or the manpower, perhaps not even the political will, to do the job that Trump and Israel would like them to do. But nevertheless, they have been somewhat successful this year than they and the end of last year than they had been since the 1980s when Hezbollah were formed. So Hezbollah themselves, being one of Iran's main proxies, are themselves now facing increased pressure, not only domestically, but outside of Lebanon, internationally. And this will hopefully bring Iran to their senses to understand that they can no longer rely on what was formerly very strong military support from one of their proxies to help them in any conflict against Israel, who will certainly be brought into the war if Trump decides to attack.
Thank you so much, Peter Bourne, for joining us here today on NewsX World. Thank you. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio reaffirmed that the war in Ukraine does not have a military solution. He emphasised that only negotiations could end the conflict, positioning Washington as the essential mediator. Rubio's comments came after the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, following a phone call with US President Donald Trump, said Kyiv expects trilateral talks in March to pave the way for a leaders' meeting. Rubio also highlighted the US's ongoing efforts to pressure Moscow, including additional sanctions on Russia's oil company and continued arms sales to Ukraine. Regardless of the diplomatic push, Rubio made it clear that President Trump's patience is not infinite and expressed frustration with the prolonged war, calling it completely stupid and senseless. However, he reiterated the US commitment to working towards a peaceful resolution and asserted that only through negotiations could a long-term solution be reached. Meanwhile, both sides continue to prepare for the next round of talks with hopes to finalise a leaders' meeting in the near future. Let's listen in to what the US Secretary of State had to say.
This afternoon, in order to have the third round of our talks with the US team. And we have made some progress last time. We were able to find some sort of understandings. And I think based on those understandings, we can build something in the form of an agreement, a deal.
We are now being joined by retired Major General Sadakaji, who is a senior geopolitical and strategic defence expert. Thank you so much for joining us here on NewsX World. Does advocating negotiations risk undercutting military support for Ukraine, or is it a realistic recognition of the conflict's limits?
Good afternoon, Ellie. Thank you for inviting me for your show. Two components. One is the land estate under occupation by Russia, and second is the military aid to Ukraine. Be stopped or should be continued. My take on the whole issue is that if the peace process has to come to some kind of a tangible and substantive end state close to a ceasefire, a lasting ceasefire and lasting peace, then scaling down the expectations or demands from relevant stakeholders by the process of give and take should be an acceptable norm and practice. So if the military aid is being expected to be cut down to Ukraine, Russia also should be expected to cut down its activities of dominance along the eastern flank, that is the Donbas region. So therefore, to answer your question, I would recommend that a process of give and take, a negotiated stance should be expected. But while it is desirable, but is it feasible on ground? That's what the whole issue is. For that, one has to go back in time and analyze the historical triggers. That was the primary reason as to why Russia invaded. Unless we address the core issues, the conflict will continue unabated and maybe eternally. Thus, to bring this mindless conflict to an end, a serious and sincere effort has to go in. What Marco Rubio is saying as a political decision, what it means is that the concessions have to be made by both the sides, for which Zelensky has gone a great deal in scaling down his demands and his expectations. Maybe it will not be inappropriate to expect similar kind of scaling down or compromises to be made by Russia. Back to you, Eddie.
And can peace talks gain traction if both sides still remain far apart on the issues like territory, security guarantees and post-war arrangements? Are they just going to keep going back and forwards?
Absolutely. Short, the cryptic answer to your question is no. No headway can be made. This traction that you are talking of, I would actually put it this way, that some beginning has been made. And when you make a very noble and high-end objective in a conflict zone, one would expect that the process of negotiation would go through very significant milestones of denial, resistance, reconciliation, adaptation, finally acceptance. I think a long journey has been covered in a short time, wherein the demands have been scaled down. However, Russia should be very mindful of the compromises being made by Ukraine. While Ukraine is expected to understand the compulsions of Russia, Russia should also be made to understand the imperatives on which the Ukraine is expected, because ceding 20% of land will question the very validity of rules-based order in 21st century, that is the sovereign integrity and the territorial integrity. Therefore, is Russia prepared to accept a new norm or new normal, which is expected from Ukraine to become a kind of a rule of law? Well, if that is yes, then I don't think we are on a path to make any tangible progress. So therefore, the traction must continue, and no matter how much time it takes, this endeavor on part of Donald Trump and his team, I'm sure they are on a very progressive and forward-looking path for a lasting peace. Back to you, Ellie.
Thank you, Major General Stakhaji, but don't go anywhere as we will join back with you in just a moment. Let's listen in to what the US Secretary of State had to say.
As an example, the president levied additional sanctions late last year on the oil company, Rosneft. The administration continues to sell weaponry to Ukraine. We don't sell weapons to Russia, and we don't sanction Ukraine. The president values the fact that he is the only global leader that has any chance in the world of bringing these two sides together to a negotiating table. We're the only country or only entity on the planet that's been able to achieve having Russian negotiators and Ukrainian negotiators sit at the table and talk to one another. So we don't want to walk away from that. We know that at the end, the war in Ukraine does not have a military solution. That war will be settled through a negotiation. And right now, we are the only country in the world that can be a catalyst for negotiation. If we forfeit that role, no one else can do it. That said, do I believe the president's patience is infinite? I do not. but I'm not going to forecast for you when that runs out or at what point he decides not to do it any longer. I could tell you, and I think you've heard him express a deep frustration that this has not come to an end because he sees it as a completely stupid and senseless war.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has stated that both Russia and China should be included in any future nuclear arms control agreement. Let's listen in to what he has to say in his statement.
So we believe, the president strongly believes, that for any sort of agreement on nuclear agreement in the 21st century to be legitimate, it has to involve these three countries, the United States, Russia, and China. And we're going to continue to explore their willingness to do so. They have publicly said they're not willing to do it. I'm sure you've heard them say that. I'm sure they've reiterated, and I know they restated that again very recently. But we'll continue to press on it because we think it would be good for the world if we could reach such an agreement. The president would be in favor of that if we could do it, but it has to be all.
In addition, Rubio has also touched upon China's rapidly increasing nuclear stockpiles, stating that while China may claim to be far behind the US and Russia in terms of arsenal size, they have the capacity to close the gap easily. Moreover, Rubio has discussed the current state of US-China relations, saying that both countries have reached a point of strategic stability, avoiding a full-blown global trade war. We're now being rejoined by retired Major General Sudhakaji. Thank you for joining us back here. How does the expiry of the New START treaty between the US and Russia shape the urgency and complexity of creating a 21st century arms control deal that also accounts for China's growing nuclear state?
Yeah, great question. In 21st century, one would ideally expect the planet Earth to be free of any nuclear warhead. But that is not the case. The reality is China is going by leaps and bounds and expanding its nuclear arsenal and going in for very, I would say, potentially very dangerous weapon systems, particularly when it has developed the hypersonic glide vehicles, which can take the warhead. No radar system or surveillance system in the world available today, they may be able to detect, but they cannot intercept. So there is a huge danger. And second thing is that in its nuclear test site in Lochner, it is given to be believed that they have the weapon systems in mated condition. So under the circumstances, when the New START doctrine or agreement has expired on 5th of February or 6th of February this year, it is very, very extremely volatile and dangerous to have a world without any safety mechanism or monitoring mechanism and mechanism of checks and balances to prevent any nuclear holocaust. Therefore, the urgency, this is answer to the first part of your question. Second part about China being included in the agreement. Well, I would say that yes, the stance is very positive and legitimate. The expectations are also legitimate by USA. But is China going to come under pressure and toe the line? I don't think so. Because China has got, rather I would say, far too many leverages in its favor. It can weaponize the rare earth elements. It can weaponize many other issues and technology, particularly critical minerals and technology. And it will start putting countervailing pressure against the USA. So therefore, I would recommend that it makes more sense to go in for a short-term, a medium-term and long-term kind of a goal. In the short term, it is advisable to go in for extension of the START agreement.
The physics was known for quite a while, and so that I think it hasn't.
Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. Iran and the United States hold a third round of indirect nuclear talks in Geneva as Washington builds up forces in the Middle East. Both sides say they want diplomacy but warn they will respond if the other resorts to military action. Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai wins an appeal overturning his 2022 fraud conviction, with the court quashing the guilty verdict and sentence. The ruling comes days after he was jailed on separate national security charges, and he remains in custody. Russia launches a wave of missile and drone attacks across Ukraine, wounding at least 8 people ahead of high-level talks between Kyiv and Washington to end the war. Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton are set to appear before the House Oversight Committee in its investigation into the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The depositions are scheduled to take place in Chappaqua, New York, where the couple reside. Cuba's Interior Ministry says Border Patrol forces engage in a shootout with a US speedboat, killing 4 people. Authorities say the vessel carries a Florida license plate with the US state located about 145 kilometers from the island. South Korea and the United Arab Emirates sign a defense cooperation MOU worth more than $35 billion, according to Seoul's presidential envoy. President Lee Jae-myung's chief of staff, Kang Kyun-sik, says the projects cover air defense as well as air force and naval capabilities. The USS Gerald R. Ford departs Crete after a supply stop as President Donald Trump sends the carrier strike group to the Middle East. The move comes amid a broader US military buildup as Washington weighs possible action against Iran. Russia questions how President Donald Trump's proposed board of peace would coexist with the United Nations Security Council, saying the UN remains the only recognized global authority on peace and security. We start this hour in Geneva, where Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi has stated that the United States and Iran have demonstrated unprecedented openness to new ideas and solutions following his meeting with US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. This comes as Oman's Foreign Minister is headed to mediate the latest round of nuclear talks between the US and Iran in Geneva, aimed at resolving their long-standing nuclear dispute and averting new US strikes on Iran following a large-scale military buildup. The two countries renewed negotiations this month, seeking to break a decades-long impasse over Tehran's nuclear program, which Washington, other Western states, and Israel believe is aimed at building nuclear arms. Tehran denies this. According to reports, US Special Envoy Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Kushner will attend the indirect talks with Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Joining us now to discuss this pressing situation coming out of the Swiss capital is Sol Sadka, a political commentator. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Sol, for joining us. This third round of negotiations, do you have any optimism when it comes to them? Do you think that we might reach a possible deal here? And what sides are both countries on?
It's clear, though, whatever happens, that a deal is possible. A deal is possible, but only because of the vast array of American weapons that have been built up around Iran over the past 2 months to unprecedented levels. And the question is, though, the Iranian regime that has to make a deal. So some of them are looking out at those American weapons and thinking, wow, those weapons could wipe us out within 2 days. And at that point, we will be helpless. We will be at the mercy of the Americans within 48 hours. And then there are other people in the regime who are genuine theocrats who don't actually care because they really want to go down with the ship. They believe that Armageddon is a theological imperative for them, and they want to bring that about. And the question will be not just who will have the upper hand inside Iran as they face this American weaponry, In other words, they have the choice. Do they meet the American demands pretty much in their entirety, which is to give up their nuclear program, to neuter their ballistic missile program, and stop funding their proxies? Anyway, their proxies are beyond funding, they don't have any money. And in return, they will essentially get nothing, perhaps some minor sanctions relief. Or do they go to war with the USA, who now have a vast array of weapons around them? And the decision has to be made within inside Iran. Certainly Trump, who himself was the victim of at least one and possibly two assassination attempts by the IRGC in the 4 years between his two presidencies, hasn't got any time for them and is probably leading them down the garden path. But most likely, he is willing to make some kind of deal, but entirely on his own terms, at which point the Iranians will have to decide whether to accept it. And like we said, what it really depends on here is less about what the Americans want to happen and more about whether the Iranian regime could be sufficiently united within themselves to make a deal and survive to live another day.
And Sol, talking about uranium enrichment here, the two sides are on completely different pages. There are talks about the Iranians scaling their uranium enrichment down in a huge way. However, absolute zero, they said, is not an option. It wants to maintain its nuclear capabilities to enrich for peaceful purposes only. How likely do you see the United States agreeing to that, if at all? What sanctions, if any, would you see relieved if the Iranians do indeed agree to a total halt of enrichment?
Well, it could be we will see in sanctions relief in stages. So if there were to be a deal, and to be honest, it looks unlikely, but if there were to be a deal, my guess is that there will be checks and balances to ensure that sanctions would be released only in return for verified success. So the handing over of the enriched uranium they already have, or its inspection by inspectors and decommissioning, because it simply could be that it's buried under a mountain and is inaccessible. And the end of their program, the handing over the centrifuges and so on. My guess is that there are people in the American administration, Rubio and even Vance, who has been seen as a kind of a dove as regards to this kind of thing in the past. They are getting into line, and they all understand that Iran's long game is to build nukes, and they are willing to play a very long game. The problem is, though, that the Iranians in the past 6 weeks have murdered over 30,000 of their own people in riots. Rioters, protesters who rose up against them with the encouragement of the United States. And it's unclear whether the United States could really make a deal, shake the hand that is that bloody, dripping in the blood of their own protesters. Can the American regime, including Marco Rubio, for example, would they be willing to shake that hand? I think it's implausible. And my suspicion is this is all a dance, and that over the next days or weeks, we will see kinetic action in Iran. But I would put that at an 80% probability. There is a 20% probability, as we have seen in the past, that some deal will be made and Iran will live to fight another day. And
yes,
it's unclear which direction we're going in, but I would say the vast majority of the probability rests on the kinetic dismantlement of Iran's missile and the remains of its nuclear capabilities.
And so, how much does the domestic public in the United States have over this deal? We know that the majority of Americans, from most polls, don't support military intervention in Iran. Well, at least don't trust Donald Trump at the helm of making those decisions. We do have midterms coming up, of course, at the end of the year. Some and a lot of the American public have been rather critical of Donald Trump's foreign policy, where they asked him to stop getting America dragged into forever wars, as they put it. And so how important is the American public when coming to making that decision, do you think?
Well, the American public is the American public is actually critical to Donald Trump. He has lived his life over the past 10 years in politics, very much driven by polls. He is very tied into this. So on the one hand, yes, it does appear the Americans, if you say, do you want the United States military to go to war with Iran? They will generally say no. At the same time, the post-war reviews of the 12-day war and America's brief interaction there of Midnight Hammer was very much positive for Donald Trump. It was seen as a great victory by the vast majority of the American population, and certainly the core of his party, which is what really matters to him, and certainly the centrists in America. And those are the people that he has to tie over. Ditto with the Maduro raid. The vast majority of people are in favor. It was even very hard for the Democratic Party to criticize him for that, because after all, what has he done if not arrest an evil narco dictator? So this probably would be the same kind of thing. So when you ask people, do you want to see a war with Iran? Well, you're asking them, do you want American boots on the ground? Do you want a protracted multi-year engagement in the style of Iraq? And the vast majority of people will say no to that. But do they care if there is a period of a few weeks to months where America is patrolling the skies of Iran and dismantling its nuclear and missile armory? Most likely, if you ask them to that question, they would not object. And assuming the battle, which seems likely, does go as well as previous engagements that Trump has engaged in, sharp and quick, proper shock and awe stuff, then most likely the American public will approve of it. If you recall, though, the Iraq War initially, back in 2003, went very well. The shock and awe game that the Americans played was extremely effective and dismantled the Iraqi regime within a few weeks. What happened then, though, however, was the interference of various militias, a lot of them funded by Iran, by the way, who made sure that the peace was unwinnable. So while America did win the war within a few weeks in a technical sense, what then dragged out was a mess of bloodshed, much of it instigated by Iran. And so this would be essentially the end of that era. And my guess is that Trump, and particularly Rubio and people behind it, recognize, particularly in the light of the fact they can no longer use their tariff, that was Trump's other toy, that they would like to have some kind of effect over here.
Okay, so do stay with us as we turn over to our next story. We move over to Europe, where Russia has handed over the bodies of 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed in the war, according to Vladimir Medinsky, a senior Russian negotiator. In return, Moscow received the bodies of 35 Russian soldiers. The exchange comes as fighting continues along several fronts, with no sign of a broad ceasefire. Meanwhile, the United States and Ukraine are set to discuss post-war reconstruction during talks in Geneva. Officials say the discussions will focus on long-term recovery, infrastructure rebuilding, and economic stability. The talks underscore efforts to plan for Ukraine's future, even as the conflict with Russia grinds on. So, of course, we're now expecting a trilateral meeting with Russia, Ukraine and the United States in early March. But today we're seeing a bilateral meeting between in Geneva, with the United States and Ukraine. Where do you think each side stands right now?
The situation in Ukraine is a catastrophe. The Russians are... The reason there's an impasse in Ukraine is because there are two things happening at the same time, and both sides are winning, if you look at it from different perspectives. So the Ukrainians are winning because they are slowly grinding down the Russian war machine and their economy, while the Russians are winning because they're slowly, very slowly, maybe a few meters a day on average over the past 4 years now. We're now in the 5th year of this war. They are moving forward a couple of meters a day. And so they feel like they're winning on the battlefield. Both sides are winning, but also both sides are losing. And because of that, their red lines do not intersect. And there's no way for them really to come to peace, particularly because the only side that can really stop it here are the Russians, unless the Ukrainians can stop it with capitulation, but that's not really acceptable to their population. The only people outside that can end this right now are the Russians. And the problem for Putin is that if he does end the war with such a catastrophic result of barely moving 100 kilometers from Russia's original borders and losing perhaps 1 million men to death and serious injury, as well as the entire stockpile of weapons that they had left over from the Cold War, and all their prestige and all their reputation as an arms manufacturer, what Russia has lost is endless. Their ability to export petrochemicals to Europe, all that is gone forever, more or less. And if he ends the war now in that situation, he will also end up with an economy that falls flat. Because currently the Russians have geared their entire economy to a war footing. And if the war ends, that's the end of that. And no one is going to want to buy their weapons because everyone has seen how bad they are. So the Russian economy, if the war ends, collapses. And if the Russian economy collapses, that's probably the end of Putin. So the war has to continue simply to save his skin from the Russian perspective, and from the Ukrainian perspective, it has to continue because they're facing an existential threat. And that's why each side has their red lines out beyond where the other can accept a deal, and why probably for the inevitable future, there will be no deal, however many rounds of talks there are in Geneva and so on.
Yes, Sol Sadka, thank you so much for talking to us. We'll of course be keeping tabs on those talks in Geneva as they progress as well. We now turn over to West Asia once again, and Syria's government and Druze factions in the southern city of Sawida have successfully carried out their first prisoner exchange since deadly clashes in the predominantly Druze city last summer. The exchange confirmed by the Syrian government saw the release of 61 Druze prisoners who had been detained in Adra Central Prison located near Damascus. In return, the Druze National Guard forces freed 25 Syrian government personnel. This significant development comes amid heightened tensions between the Syrian government and local Druze factions who have historically maintained a level of autonomy in the region. The prisoner exchange is seen as a step towards easing hostilities, although the region's complex political and sectarian dynamics mean that further negotiations will be necessary to ensure long-term peace. The clashes last summer had further exacerbated tensions, and this exchange signals a potential thaw in relations. However, it remains to be seen whether this marks the beginning of a broader peace process or whether deeper divisions will continue to influence the region's stability. Joining us now to discuss Syria is Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar, a senior strategic and international affairs expert. He joins us live from New Delhi. Of course, a particularly volatile region, the Sawida province. We saw hundreds of people, whether they were Druze, whether they were Bedouin fighters, killed last year. And this plays into the broader instability, of course, that Syria has been put into post-Bashar al-Assad. What do you think of this development, and what does it mean for the future of Syria's disruptive northeast?
Thank you, Thomas. I think it's, first of all, it's a positive development because it's a very volatile region of southern Syria, and Druze are a very small, tightly knit ethno-religious community which are concentrated in this area. And since 2011, Druze have adopted a hedging strategy. They have avoided full alignment with Damascus or the armed opposition, and they actually work in their own silos. A couple of religious leadership, Hikmat al-Hijri, he's an influential cleric there, and he has had a confrontation attitude towards Damascus due to security failures, conscription, and the people have been detained, and there is a number of militias who are actually working in this area. Since 2023, Sawida saw sustained demonstrations over economic collapse, corruption, and forced recruitment. And I think with the intervention of the United States also this time, this is a positive development because over a period of time, we saw here in these areas there was a lack of governance on the part of the Syrian government, which created space for smuggling, kidnapping, and tribal clashes. And Druze filled these gaps at that point of time. Second most important is it's a very close proximity to the Golan Heights and Israel, which Israel has occupied this area, and Druze are community are also found in Israel. So I think the ethnicity is also there because Israel also has affinity to the Druze population of Syria, and it maintains a kind of informal concern for the safety of the Druze here, and especially it becomes important to check Hezbollah also here, because if you remember, this entire route from Iraq to Lebanon follows this region of southern Syria, and therefore it's very important for Israel also to have a kind of a control here, and this Druze population actually embedded in the Israeli-Iran shadow conflict. So I think that though it may be a fragile ceasefire as of now, because whenever we have seen a ceasefire taking place in this area, it has not been a kind of a permanent solution, because permanent solution you can only have when you resolve the differences